Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone. We'll try to multitask. My name is Marietta Radomska. I'm an assistant professor in environmental humanities at Linköping University, and also the director of the Eco and Bioart Lab and co-director of the Posthumanities Hub. And I am here with my co-partner in crime, as I'm joking, that is Professor Cecilia Åsberg, just next to me, who is professor in gender nature culture at Linköping University, and also the main director and the founder of the Posthumanities Hub. So very warm welcome to this event, and of the Sea, Art and Science for Multispecies Futures workshop. This event, in fact, is a kind of follow-up or an epilogue event for an earlier sort of symposium, Seaside Arts, that took place on the 30th of September and 1st of October on Orno, an island in the Stockholm archipelago, but also online. And both events actually really form part of the kind of curated by us, sort of half a year of seminars and events focused on the marine or sea or, oceanic or blue humanities, so to speak. And the event is co-organized by the Eco and Bioart Lab and the Posthumanities Hub. So maybe before I kind of, we dive into the nitty-gritty, who we exactly are and, what kind of organizational aspects of the event are, or technical, or, logistics, so to speak, I will try to, give you a little theoretical background. And of course, if I'm missing something, Cecilia, please, remind me, because this goes, very sort of, spontaneously. So I should perhaps, say that, of course, oceans and seas are the planet's largest ecosystems, and they stabilize climate, produce oxygen, store CO2, and host unfathomable multitude of creatures at a deep time scale. So in recent decades, scientific assessments have indicated that marine environments are seriously degraded to the detriment of most near future human and non-human communities. I mean, oceans and seas, have been the kind of, main characters of the discussions on environmental violence, for instance. And of course, this matters to us too. Climate change, environmental destruction, and diminishing biological diversity form the key pillars of the present modern human crisis of planetary proportions. This obviously calls for our attention and for responses from the modern humanities, but also modern human arts. And still, of course, a lot remains unknown at the levels of oceanic shallow waters, in depths, and along coastlines. Western cultural imaginaries picture the ocean and the sea as those that wash away, neutralize, conceal, and hide in their limitless volume under the surface. And in that sense, also, the ocean and the sea are marked kind of in cultural imaginaries, in this kind of cultural sense, as spaces of forgetting. In other words, out of sight, out of mind. So our workshop today aims to bring together artists, researchers, writers, and practitioners who, through their very different, and diverse critical and creative inter and transdisciplinary practices, explore the boundary areas of the coastline, the estuary, and their accompanying cultural and scientific meanings. Also, not only the coastline and the estuary, but also the ocean depths, and the kind of, all the liminal zones around, so to speak. So we will also zoom in on the wrack zone, particularly in the context of the Baltic Sea, with its low-trophic communities of algae, mussels, and other species, not only as key actors in polluted warming waters of the climate change, but also as catalysts for new co-creations, collaborations, creativities, and environmental imaginaries. So in other words, as you have noticed, the end in the title of the event really plays this kind of double or triple role. It is the end in the sense of the edge. It is the end in the sense of the kind of, in-between liminal zone, but it is also the end in a kind of more temporal sense, in the spatial sense, potential end. So questions of extinction, annihilation will be coming in, but also, we'll ask what kind of potentials for thinking otherwise might unfold from this critical creative attempt of thinking with and through the kind of marine zones. So we hope that, you will engage with that question. What happens at, before, or after the end of the sea, together with us? And also with the question, how can humans be a more caring and attentive ecological force for multi-species futures by the edge of the sea? And I think that now I would like to maybe I should also say one more thing, that, of course, this workshop is actually generously supported by the Seedbox Environmental Humanities Collaboratory, but also by Åke Foundation for the project Marine Humanities, or Havs Humaniora. And I will pass the baton right now to Cecilia to just say a few words about who we actually are.
Thank you so much, Marietta, and it's so fantastic to see you all here. This is so exciting, I must say, and it's my great honor to introduce you a little bit to who we are. And I would like to start to tell you a little bit about Marietta, and I'm not sure which direction I should point Marietta, because it depends on, but yeah. Marietta Radomska, assistant professor and researcher at Linköping University, is also the director and founder of the Eco and Bioart Lab, or EBL. The EBL, the Eco and Bioart Lab, connects artists, artistic researchers, and other practitioners, as well as PhD students whose practice and research focus on art and the environment in their broadest understanding is at the center. The EBL opens up a transdisciplinary space where artistic practice and artistic research converge in synergy with philosophy, cultural theory, performance studies, art studies, visual culture, queer death studies, environmental humanities, and of course, feminist post-humanities. So in this way, Marietta Radomska, in her research and in her collaborations, and of course the EBL, addresses critical questions concerned with life and death, nature and culture, art and science, ecology, environment, vulnerabilities, materialities, and the body in a more than human sense. Now, I am so proud to give this a little bit longer introduction to the EBL because Marietta Radomska is absolutely instrumental in organizing this event that we get to enjoy today. But Marietta and me are also co-captains, as you mentioned, and I think I have a ship here somewhere to illustrate that, of the Posthumanities Hub. And let me just say a few words about the Posthumanities Hub. So I'm Cecilia Åsberg, called Cici, and I'm professor at Linköping University and director of the Posthumanities Hub. And Marietta, Radomska and me have been doing this for some years now. Actually, the hub was started in 2008 at Linköping University, but for 3 years, when I had my guest professorship at KTH, it was mainly docked in the harbor of KTH. But now we are docking in the harbor of Linköping University. And bringing science and art to the humanities, the hub has been a transformational force of what we would like to think of as societally relevant, extra-disciplinary and super networked new humanities in Sweden and beyond. And over the years, we have tried to combine philosophy, art and science with laboratory studies, academic activism and societal commitment. And we have been part of introducing cyborg and techno-humanities, medical, environmental humanities, often by way actually of feminist science and technology studies, but of course also by way of curiosity, critique, creativity, and, which is a given, collaboration, lots of collaboration. So with that, perhaps Marietta, you would like to introduce us to the speakers.
Absolutely. I mean, this is my thank you so much, Cecilia. I mean, that was very generous. And now I will introduce you all to actually the speakers in the first panel, because I mean, as you saw probably from the program, we are arranged in 2 panels. We have a pretty tight schedule, but hopefully we can make it, you know, just in case, but with us. And so I will basically introduce everyone in the first panel, and we will have a little shift between the papers because one co-speaker is still on the way. We will start with a wonderful paper, Reverberating Futures by Fiona Hillary. So Fiona Hillary is a Melbourne-based artist and academic working in the public realm. Her passion lies in site-specific practices and the human, non-human relationships that reveal themselves across time, exploring scale through publicly shared moments of awe and wonder to more personal and intimate encounters. Fiona works with sight, neon, sound, human and non-human companion species. Her work focuses on temporary, fleeting encounters in and of the everyday. And now I will go with, introduction of everyone, but you will kind of very easily soon see Fiona, whom I will pin to the screen, but I cannot multitask, so bear with me, please. Next in the sequence will be the paper called The Collagen Commercial Extinction by Fraud, which is a fantastic duo by Audrey Sampson and Francisco Gallardo, who are a London-based duo of critical spatial practitioners, which develop forms of art-led inquiry that examine financialization through extractive practices and cultivate critical cosmogony building. Next in the sequence will be paper A Baltic Community of People and Mussels by Lena Tasse, who is a biologist and senior research coordinator at Linköping University. She has worked with projects related to sustainable development and eutrophication, both in the Baltic and in the freshwater of Lake Roxen. And finally, we will close panel 1 with the paper Out of Our Depths, Deep Sea Mining is Not Climate Action by Natalie Laurie and Mirko Nikolic. And Nat Laurie holds a BA of Fine Arts and Master in Human Rights and Democratization. For 20 years, Nat has been an organizer, communicator, campaigner, and advocate on human rights and global justice issues. They are passionate about the practice of allyship and collaborating with local communities and indigenous peoples who are resisting large-scale extractive developments and threaten their lands, oceans, lives, and livelihoods. They are also the communications coordinator for the Deep Sea Mining Campaign, who has been advocating and campaigning against the deep sea mining industry since 2011, and the coordinator at AidWatch Australia. And Mirko Nikolic works with performance, writing, and organizing in a post-disciplinary space between art, society, and environmental humanities. The primary area of concern is a critical analysis and practice of climate and social justice in the areas of intense exploitation of natural resources. Mirko's current research project, funded by the Swedish Research Council and situated at the Institute of Culture and Society, is a practical investigation into a place-based poetics of solidarity with water and earth protectors in the semi-peripheries of North and Southeast Europe. Okay, so I think that what I'm gonna do, I'm passing the baton to Fiona, whom I'm also gonna here try to pin. Fantastic. And I also will put a spotlight on you, Fiona, and basically the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marietta. It's so fabulous to be here with you all today. I hope that my VJing works appropriately. As I begin, I want to acknowledge that this project was undertaken on the stolen land and waterways of the people of the Kulin Nations, specifically the lands of the Boonwurrung, Woiwurrung and Wadawurrung people. I want to acknowledge the enduring history of the peoples of the Kulin Nation and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. My research has much in common with Marietta and Cecilia's low-trophic theory. What I describe as post-human publics is aligned with situated practices that are indeed entangled with multi-species ethics. I stand on the shoulders of many in my practice: Rosie Braidotti, Donna Haraway, Stacia Limo, Deborah Bird-Rose and Anna Singh, to name a few. Being attentive to the shimmer of the biosphere, I've learnt so much about relational practice, companion species, climate change, and how to immerse audiences in a microbial becoming that invites them to stay with the trouble. My presentation tonight invites you into the making of my most recent work, Reverberating Futures, an immersive 360-degree sound and film work. Through this presentation, I draw attention to the rich and vibrant human and non-human and more than human entanglements of public space that can be amplified by creative practice. Weaving together a feminist, new materialist, post-human cartography of creative practice reveals how the abstraction of ordinary experiences and spaces allow audiences and artists to co-constitute the possibility of something other. It explores how creative practices can trigger fleeting, transformative acts of imagination, or thinking with Haraway, it offers moments for recuperation in these anthropogenic times, co-constituting a rehearsal for the future. My creative inquiry is undertaken in the wrack zone of a distant shore. It holds in common with the Baltic Sea bioluminescent dinoflagellates. Despite there being two different species, both species enjoy the warming waters of climate change and the effluent of contemporary life. My research began at the Western Treatment Plant, a site on the western fringes of Naarm, the Woiwurrung word for Melbourne, Australia. The Western Treatment Plant is at the forefront of wastewater treatment, treating half of Melbourne's sewage, and due to the biodiversity of the site, it's home to a thriving UNESCO-sanctioned bird habitat. To give some context to the volume of sewage treated, Melbourne has a population of just over 5 million people. Central to my work is the creative project titled Treatment, developed by Australian artist Dr. Cameron Bishop and Professor David Cross, inviting artists to create in situ and place responsive works at the Western Treatment Plant. Through this work, I offer a frame for understanding and drawing together interdisciplinary approaches to creative practice in industrial sites on the urban fringe. I call it post-human publics. It's a proposition for the future. It culminates in acts of recuperation in the age of the Anthropocene and proposes an ongoing research framework in which we come to understand our entanglement in the world, a world where public space is not just a backdrop to our lives. My work explores how interdisciplinary public practices operating as laboratories can render sites that are territorialised by industry perceptible. This creative inquiry manifests around a life-altering relationship with what I now consider my companion species, Noctiluca scintillans. The micro-practices of my everyday shifted through learning to live with dinoflagellates in my home and in the ocean tides as my art practice was transformed in the delivery of immersive audience experiences. Through this research, I've been influenced by Deborah Bird-Rose's notion of the shimmer of the biosphere, which I used to describe the awe and wonder of dinoflagellate blooms. Through the shimmer with my companion species and appropriating a LIMO's concept of transcorporeality, I invite the audience to understand our dissolve in the warming waters of climate change. The work manifests the many ways interdisciplinary, posthuman, site-specific entanglements can reveal the assemblages of life through creative practice. According to botanist Gustav Hallegraaff, blooms in Australia have become more prolific since the 1980s. From the Gulf of Carpentaria, where waters are warmer, dinoflagellates now bloom along the east coast of Australia, including Tasmania, and across to Rottnest Island in Western Australia. Noting that water temperature plays an important role in distribution, their blooms reveal much about our warming waters. After the intense bushfires of 2020, reports of blooms were rife along the east coast of Australia. What I've come to know is that algal blooms occur when conditions in the water become right for them to grow in exponential volume. The conditions are reported as being warmer waters with an increase of phytoplankton and nitrogen. Excess nitrogen predominantly occurs with the effluent of industry and human habitation. The use of fertilisers in agriculture and fire retardants in bushfire seasons all flush nitrogen into our waterways. The most popular scientific interpretation of Noctilucas is the use of bioluminescence is to ward off predators, either by scaring them off or by illuminating the predator itself, making them prey to larger predators. In my relationship with Noctilucas, I've come to see them as performers of the ocean. Through their literal shimmer, they're delivering a strong and clear message of climate change. We need to immerse ourselves in their shimmer and, with the pulses of life, allow the awe and wonder of their glow to imbue the everyday practices of our lives, the micro practices, being mindful of the way we are living and conscious of what we contribute to the warming of the ocean. Quote, "We are called into recognition of the shimmer of life's pulses and the great patterns within which the power of life expresses itself. We are therefore called into gratitude for the fact that in the midst of terrible destruction, life finds ways to flourish, and that the shimmer of life does indeed include us." Deborah Bird-Rose, 2017. Interdisciplinary relational attuning to everyday life can enable us to understand the relational multiplicities of the world. I contend that creative practice yields attentive registers where lines of flight can offer new readings of sight and conjure new relationalities that manifest stories for our times. In this instance, the proliferation of dinoflagellate blooms invites the audience to move beyond awe and wonder and dissolve in their own effluent, implicating them in the warming waters of anthropogenic seas. Noctiluca scintillans live in the ocean. They're nomadic and non-motile. They rely on the wind and the tide to move. Their glow works in a circadian rhythm. They have a flagellum that extends from their cell, scooping phytoplankton, nutrients and other algae from the water as food. They sequester carbon and emit oxygen and are useful as a bioassay tool to detect pollutants in water. Globally, algae contribute 70% of the world's oxygen. They give us life. Like Barad's description of brittle stars, I contend bioluminescent dinoflagellates are agentive beings, lively configurations of the world, Barad 2014. 3 significant blooms have occurred along the coast of Victoria throughout my research. I've travelled in the early hours of the morning and collected samples of blooms and learned much about Noctiluca scintillans, and when, through an enzymatic process, luciferin becomes luciferase, it creates a blue glow. As a guest in my house, living on my washing machine, I fed them with phytoplankton and light. I played Brian Eno to them for 12 hours a day, and for 4 weeks, they glowed to our reverberations in the early hours of the morning. My family life changed and became focused on an unautomated grow light and the containers of Noctilucas in our laundry. Something so small made us sometimes feel overwhelmed by their presence and our responsibility for their care, and also, of course, by their shimmer. Collaborating with scientists, I've observed and learnt laboratory methods for culturing dinoflagellates. Observing the laboratory practices of the biotechnology team at RMIT University here in Melbourne allowed me to understand the conditions required for the laboratory care of bioluminescent dinoflagellate cultures. Convenient to the Western treatment plant as my test site of practice, Noctiluca scintillans flourish in secondary treated water. I consider the Western treatment plant as a transcorporeal site where human, non-human and more than human are entangled in the daily process of sewage treatment. The transcorporeal act of sewage treatment is entangled in differing scales of sorts of biological, technological, economic, social, political, and other systems. The biopolitics of sewage is exemplified in the fact that the Western treatment plant is ordinarily closed to the general public, rendered abject by exclusion. I am of this site. My urine, my shit, my vomit, my menstrual blood is treated at the Western treatment plant. I am made public here. My waste is expelled as treated water. I am of the warming waters of Port Phillip Bay, where I visit fieldwork sites to listen to and observe bioluminescent dinoflagellates in full bloom. I consider their blooming the ultimate entanglement. This is a transcorporeal project. It gives rise to new ways of attuning to the micro practices of my everyday life, focusing on local shorelines, seeking blooms, scientific practices of bloom prediction and inoculation, caring for my companions in my home, watching and documenting their glow through sound and image. New listening practices, new knowledge of immersive media, new ways of thinking, and with and through public space, new immersions of sight. I'm just going to try a quick techno split that I hope will work. As if in a dream sequence, in the blink of an eye, you're suspended in the ocean, in the nitrogen-rich, effluent infused warming waters of climate change. Take some time to orient yourself. You're drifting with the tidal movement of the ocean. It's high tide and the wind's moderate. Give yourself over to the circadian pattern of dinoflagellates, where they shift from a red bloom when the sun is in the sky to a shimmering blue bloom as the earth turns and the moon rises. You're engulfed in the shimmer, slightly pulsing as the thousands of single-celled organisms glow in the water around you. You are in the process of becoming with a bloom of Noctiluca scintillans, to dissolve, shifting the godlike view of often experienced in the telling of oceanic tales to a microbial experience of becoming with and as a single-celled organism. Let the membrane engulf you. There's nothing to do but float and become dinoflagellate. For just a moment, feel yourself dissolve into the single-celled eukaryote. Sorry, I've just lost my groove for a moment. Reverberating Futures entangles the audience in the toxic flows of the ocean, reaching beyond the wonder of the glow of bioluminescent dinoflagellates in what a limo would describe as our own dissolve. It's an invitation to pay attention to how the earth shimmers. The immersive sonic and temporal work operates transversally to explore how key contemporary art methods of attuning to sight, being present and in situ across time, are harnessed to reveal a creative convergence with science and the environment. This project argues that we need different ways of understanding how humans are interwoven into living and non-living transcorporeal networks, and specifically how we are implicated in global warming and climate change. The fixed 360-degree camera implicates the viewer in a microbial becoming, not just becoming dinoflagellate, but becoming in the excrement of the anthropogenic world that flows through the oceans as toxins. The work is intended not to imagine another world, but to locate us in the world we are in and submerge the viewer in the toxic flows of the ocean through our own dissolve. In this research, the framing of the Western treatment plant as a laboratory demonstrates how new understandings of sight connected to the human, non-human and transcorporeal entanglements provided the impetus for me to imagine posthuman publics, triggering fleeting, transformative acts of imagination or moments for recuperation within and through ephemeral public practice. Posthuman publics is an ongoing experiment in staying with the trouble while living on a damaged planet. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was absolutely wonderful. So I think that we already have hearts and big applause. Thank you so much for absolutely amazing paper. So yes, I mean, the organization is that we actually run with papers and only then we'll have the joint conversation. So I'm gonna jump here with, spotlight. Let me see. And we have Frod here. So I'm actually passing the baton to Frod and pinning you, and then I need to put a spotlight on you. I'm kind of fighting here with technicalities, so hopefully I can make it. But yes, please, the floor is yours.
Sorry, we are trying to share the screen as you were switching it over. Does everyone see our slides now?
Yes, that's a slideshow view.
It works.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for also the invitation to the Posthumanities Hub. It's really lovely to be able to contribute, but also listen to what you've all been working on. So we'd like to actually just jump straight into it because of the time limitation.
Codfish is so thick that you could walk across their backs back to the shore. The man marks the earth with ruins. His control stops with the shore. I believe that may be affirmed that in relation to our present models of fishing, a number of the most important sea fisheries, such as the cod fishery, the herring fishery, and the mackerel fishery, are inexhaustible. We do not associate the idea of antiquity with the ocean. No wonder how it looked 1,000 years ago, for it was equally wild and unfathomable always.
The inexhaustible oceans. Despite these quotes across the centuries, already in 1376, a petition to the English Parliament regarding the Wendichun trawl, which is a type of beam trawler used in the Thames estuary, was stating the following: "Of so small a mesh, no manner of fish, however small, entering within it can pass out, and is compelled to remain therein and be taken, by means of which instrumental the fishermen aforesaid take so great abundance of small fish aforesaid, that they know not what to do with them, but to feed and fatten the pigs, to the great damage of the whole commons of the kingdom, and the destruction of the fisheries in like places, for which they pray remedy." And some centuries later, Carl Safina stated that, this is in 1998, "Trawling is analogous to strip mining or clear cutting, except that trawling affects areas that are larger by orders of magnitude." So today we would like to very briefly explore with you different forms of exhaustion from the social death in contemporary forms of life subjugation, such as the ones in free trade zones, to the commercial extinction of such protagonists as the brown shrimp, which is called the crangon, which is depleted to the point of being no longer profitable to harvest commercially. Enter Mary Berry. Sea bass has become very popular, quite understandably, because brill and halibut and Dover sole are very expensive. It has a lovely flavor, sea bass, and when you marry it with my favorite ingredient, shrimps, in a delicious sauce, what could be better?
Mary Berry recipe is one that tells the story of commercial extinction, of species that are overfished, become rare, and therefore expensive or inaccessible. It used to be that the hulls of stove boats, as well as the dearest memories of Mary Berry, were filled with brown shrimp before its commercial extinction in the Thames estuary. They were loaded in lorries and sent to the special economic zones of Tangier for peeling, only to be sent back to Europe for sale and consumption.
Paradoxically, or perhaps assiduously, these zones are conceptually governed under the mare liberum principle, which is the freedom of the seas. And so much of European food has been processed in expert processing zones at the outskirts of the EU, such as this one, famously pictured by Ito Barada. These are zones freed from the labor relation systems, freed from environmental regulations, freed from duty imposition, and from international property rights, just to name a few.
Overfishing, facilitated by bilateral and reciprocity agreements between the EU and third countries, has dramatically reduced biodiversity of oceans. In a way, the brown shrimp rapid reproduction and short lifespan properties has afforded its survival and proliferation in zones of commercial extinction. We may begin to think of the sea as a plantation of commercially extinct species, and how we may tend to these oceanic plantations.
The three figures of commercial extinction. This is our part one.
Oh.
Commercial extinction is said to occur when a species is too depleted to commercially harvest. It implies death from economic, societal, and cultural realm but not from the total or the virtual biotic inventory of marine life. So it's a comfortable form of catastrophe, we could say. Commercial extinction suggests that the destructive nature of capital is relative and not absolute. In other words, while commercial exhaustion reduced fishing grounds to a mere object of exploitation, we could say that it shows the very exhaustion of exhaustion because of the remainder of the species. It shows the failure of capitalism to consume or to fulfill extinction. Within capitalism, there are certain things that cannot be extinguished entirely, as we know, such as unemployment. And to give another example, here you can see how much shrimp we caught on a fine summer afternoon in the Thames. Therefore, we may begin to question whether commercial extinction has paradoxically afforded the species liminal survival. Commercial extinction is a form of a slow death. Sorry, I'm losing my ears. Normally, commercial extinction, or normally not commercial extinction, but extinction, pertains exclusively to the concept of population, to the unit of all species in a geographical area. However, commercial extinction and the commercialization of population that is inherent to commercial extinction contextualizes extinction as a space of power, of governmentality, and of financialization of life.
In our story, this can be thought through the three figures of the commercial extinction that we propose to be the price of oil, the trolling net, and the internal combustion engine. The mother trawler is a construction that combines traditional Greek boat-building knowledge with newer developments such as the auto trawl, liquid fuel, and the internal combustion engine. Petrol provides more driving power, heavy gear, and less fishing effort. The Granton auto trawl, for instance, that we saw in the picture, afforded a 7-fold widening of the cumbersome beam trawl. As a result, modern trawlers create thicker, more turbid clouds of detritus, deposits and bycatch in their wake, and completely stripping the seabeds. This is the complaint that Audrey was reading at the beginning, elevated to the Parliament already in the 14th century by the fishermen of the Thames.
The scars of the ploughing, the scraping, and the digging at the roots of the seabed life are visible to the satellite's eyes and the ears of the sonar.
Oil rigs and oil price were also instrumental to the fishing trawler mud trails, the mark aerial pictures as well as echo sounds maps, because they granted more horsepower. In this picture, you see a choreography of trawlers in the South China Sea.
Before oil, some historians noticed that the increase in the trawled fish trade was correlated with the expansion of railway infrastructure. More specifically, the opening of the North Sea to trawling in the 19th century led to the explosive construction of railways. At first, this development offered a sense of temporal shrinkage and geographical expanse. The railway enabled more fishing grounds to become profitable as markets became larger than ever, and modern transportation lengthened the possible distance between place of production and the place of consumption, which in practice commodified the shrimp. The combustion engine aligned railways and trawlers into a single system of production. And nowadays, free trade zones are the railways to commodification that enable an even greater abstraction between production and consumption. Part 2, the invisible hand, social death and sacrifice zones.
Neoliberalism promised the extinction of manual labor, but the ghostly workings of the invisible hand. The road to progress demanded the implementation of what was thought then to be the temporary establishment of special zones to stimulate emerging or problematic economies. Once the genius of this invention became clear, sacrifice zones began sprouting everywhere. Zones where labor and environmental conditions capitulate to the empire of both of the laboring and invisible hands. The extraterritoriality of the free trade zones hints at what Jonathan Crary defines as a time without time, a time extracted from any material or identifiable demarcation, a time without sequence or recurrence.
Part 3, free trade or trade freed. Free trade zones exemplify the continuation of colonial power structures embedded in free trade. The extension of the empire's tentacle through time, wars, and even its own apparent dissolution.
After the Second World War, special economic zones and free trade zones were marketed as a remedy to unclog sclerotic economies, ensuring that they will remain frictionless and liquid. They were initially planned as a temporary parastates, where governmentality was excluded. As a result of these turbo-capitalistic enclaves, taxation, state bureaucracy, customs and regulation laws were quarantined. The special economic zones were meant to be a temporary solution until they were dissolved and absorbed into the domestic economy. In actuality, the temporary solution has become permanent. As architect Kellen Sterling has framed them, free trade zones are the most virulent paradigm of the neoliberal order. It is no longer the exception, but the norm. Free trade zones have become absorbed more as absorbed more of the surrounding economy into themselves. Peeling factories were established in Tangier partially as a result of the hygiene rules. In 1989, the Netherlands banned commercial shrimp peeling altogether when a dysentery outbreak killed 14 home workers. As a result, shrimp processing was offshore for the unregulated Dutch workforce to the new uncontrolled and uncontrollable zones, the outskirts of Europe. All the EU and UK companies followed suit in the search for cheap labor in Morocco. Despite the financial incentives of the free trade zones, the Dutch company Groningen Lens are developing machines to bring the brown shrimp peeling back home,
so to speak. So far, though, and despite repeated efforts and media pressure, it has escaped perfect automation, still demanding the dexterous and thin fingers of so-called unskilled Moroccan women. The collagen-rich shell of the brown shrimp sits at one of the last frontiers of mechanization. And somewhat perversely, the threat of machine development is nonetheless used to bargain labor prices down within the free trade zones. In other words, labor extinction is the basis of extortion, which leads to forms of social death for the workers in the free trade zones.
Some tasty conclusions.
According to maritime archaeologists, it's the diminishing returns of certain species that pushed the expansion of fishing operations away from the safety of riverbanks and foreshores, such as those of the Thames, to offshore fishing. The business of the brown shrimp became established in the Thames estuary, according to historical records, only after the exhaustion of more valuable species such as oysters, whelks, mussels, and winkles. Consequently, the taste for shrimp evolved within certain social strata due to the collapse of similar low-cost protein. Eventually, the trade of whelks and oysters was abandoned altogether, and London ate what was left from the estuary waters. In other words, it is exhaustion that drove demand and eventually taste, not market whims or changing technologies. The British were not lured towards a rare exotic dish, but rather habituated to a previously unpalatable sea bastard out of necessity. And so really, Mary Berry's dreams are shaped by commercial extinction. So we would like to leave you with this thought, which is to begin by rekindling our relationship with oceanic bodies, to get our feet wet, also to echo what Fiona was saying, to attune with sight, to work closely with situated and experiential knowledge and genuine long-term engagement. And most importantly, we invite you to peel your own shrimp. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, both of you. Absolutely amazing talk. I mean, you know, there's like so much richness coming in. I will not to, you know, kind of lose time because we run in this little marathon. I will remove the pin from you and I will move here to Lena. And Lena, I will put a spotlight and pin on you. And the floor is yours, my dear. So,
hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a Baltic community of people and mussels that I encountered a few years ago. But first, about myself. I grew up by the sea in Skåne, which is the extreme south of Sweden. And I think that the greatest moment in my life occurred at the age of 5. I captured 15 codfish in 1 hour, and this was a great achievement that I can still remember now. I moved on to PhD in microbiology because marine biology was too hard. And then I turned to agrotech industry, feed production, and then project management. I worked as a funding consultant, and then the regional development at Region Östergötland, and now I'm at Linköping University at the grants office. So I'm not a researcher, I'm not into arts, I'm something else. So this Baltic community of people and mussels, I'm going to start by telling a bit about the Baltic Sea. This is an image of parts of the Baltic Sea. You can see Sweden.
I just share your screen.
I'm sharing my screen. Okay, I had really great. I thought I did. Sorry, that's so classical. Oh, here we are.
It's always the tech, you know.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now it's great.
But I don't have the control. Where is it? Here we go. So this is an image of the Baltic Sea, where you can see Sweden at the left, and there's these big islands of Öland and Gotland in the middle, and we have a lot of other countries east, and we have Latvia, and we have Estonia, and to the south, Poland. But what we can see here, it's not the bioluminescent dinoflagellates we heard about in the beginning of this session. These are algae, blue-green algae, seen by Copernicus, the satellite from the European Space Agency. So these are algal blooms. They occur in the beginning of spring and in the middle of summer. And they bloom and then they die. And when they sink to the ocean bed, large dead zones occurs with hypoxia, anoxia, and of course this makes a very inhabitable space in the sea. The Baltic Sea is very shallow and it's almost closed. The water is stratified. We have oxygen-rich very not much salt water on the top, and then there is denser oxygen limited or even anoxic water at the bottom, and all of it is brackish. This is conditions that are difficult for species to live in, and it's a complicated environment. It has a very large catchment area. Water flows from rivers very far away from this sea. And this sea is one of the youngest, or even sometimes people say it's the youngest one in the world. So this is the catchment area. It's large, much larger than the sea itself. And there's all these countries and the European Union around it that has to work together to manage this sea. It has been a lot of question of fish. When all these countries go together to talk about how are we going to manage things in the Baltic Ocean, in the Baltic Sea, it was a lot about fish. The flatfish, the herring, cod, and now all that remains is spat, spig in Swedish. So this is time gone. A few years ago, there was this really nice publication. These researchers, some of them from Linköping University, showed that the Baltic Sea can be seen as a time machine for the future coastal sea. It has been one of the youngest seas. It has also been one of the first to encounter large populations, industry, all these kind of pressures. And still, since it's small and closed, shallow, climate change goes faster, everything goes faster, fishing, everything goes faster. And what these researchers are saying is that we will see the effect of these negative stresses, but also potentially effects of things that we can do to turn things around, to save this environment. But what we are currently looking at in the Baltic Sea, I think it's really the end of the ocean. But we have these low-trophic heroes. For example, these blue mussels. They grow abundantly for the moment in the Baltic Sea, and they filter the water, increases the water transparency. They're really good for the sea. They are food for birds, fish, and then somebody had this idea. Maybe they could be good food for poultry. So there was this strange idea. We're going to save the Baltic Sea, not by changing how we put things in, etc., but we will just make kind of an industry out of the Save the Sea. So we are going to farm mussels, remove them from the sea, putting into an industry, create feed for poultry, for other fish farm on land, because the sea is not habitable. And then we'll just, of course, eat it. The nutrients that we have eaten will go into the sewage plant, and the sewage plant will let some of it pass. The mussel will grow on those nutrients, and this will be this perfect circle. So a project was started, financed by the EU, of course. We were going to build mussel farms in the Baltic Sea. There is no really tradition, but we managed to build 6 mussel farms in about 5 countries. But it's a completely new activity in the Baltic Sea. And there has been, well, currently there is no live tradition of eating any mussels. And the harvest from these mussel farms were used as a biogas or fertilizer thing. But there are historic accounts from people who have eaten these mussels, but they are very small since it's brackish water. They're difficult to eat, and well, it's not a wonderful thing to eat, but still it is a wonderful resource. It's packed with protein and omega-3 lipids, and they grow on plankton. And if we remove the mussels from the sea, the nutrients are also removed from the sea. So that would mean less eutrophication, less excess nutrients for algal blooms. So the idea was to have this healthier Baltic Sea by removing nutrients and increasing the water transparency. But it was also very important for these organisms and the EU to create more jobs in the coastal communities and a new food and feed source. Because these guys, they have all been working in fisheries and even seal hunting, very, very closely to the sea, and the sea is very important for them. And since there are no fish anymore, they turn to tourism, but this is something a bit shallow, and these kind of activities were very appreciated in these communities, and there is a large effort to try to recreate coastal fisheries and other kind of activities that are not tourism in these areas. But we don't actually, these farms, they were great adventures, and the people living by a farm, they found it wonderful to have these new farms. There was this great love for the ocean and a lot of attention, and people got together, and the kids were drawing pictures of the farms and the mussels, but it still was always this lack of fish that were coming in the discussions and so on. This is Mats Emilsson. Mats Emilsson was born on the island. You can see behind him. He's approximately 70 years old now, and he has always been living by the sea, fisherman, farmer, and now farm manager for a mussel farm. So we created these farms, and there was this large of technology. This was a huge work by Mats. He created this, and they were we were all so proud of this. And what you can see here is the harvest is ongoing. There's this big bag of mussels that is being harvested. And here the big bag is full. And we created from these mussels, we created mussel meals. So they were dried and ground, and we made meal, and then food that were used in assays with poultry and farmed fish. And also a few of the mussels were used to feed insects that could then be used to feed fish. And this was all great, but it remains really experimental. I think that what we saw from this project, that there was this dream from people who started it, that this would be a new big industry from the sea. But the main creation of this project and all the other projects that have been on this similar, this is more of the community, the love, the knowledge sharing, and the people who get together. That's really what I think has been the most important and the most appreciated. And out of all these farms, there is one that is still commercially viable, at least a bit. It was there before this project. It's still here. It's in Kiel. It's really close to the shore, close to all the boats. If you take the ferry to Kiel in Germany, you will go really close to this farm. And we have these young people, the farm manager team. They are living off the sea. They are living with the mussels, and they are farming algae. And but they are still just barely going by. And this is in a part of the sea that is a little bit more saltier, so they have mussels that are big enough to sell. So it's, yes, they can, it's commercially viable, but just barely. And so we have put a lot of money and a lot of effort in creating this. And what I would like to stress is I would like to finish on this idea of human invention to create something out of a natural habitat that is basically, just a few decades ago, we were able to remove really a lot of these protein and natural resources that we are trying to create with the mussel farms, but that was just fish. So these kinds of projects have received a lot of criticism because they use a lot of money, and it's so difficult to intervene in the natural sea. A lot of money that maybe could be used for other things. If we diminished the natural stresses, that could be maybe a better way of increasing the productivity of the sea. So it was a pleasure to work with this project. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about it, but I still have this feeling that it was just something that we had to do to be able to see what has to be done really, and find the solutions that will allow nature to heal on its own in the Baltic Sea, and for this time machine to show us the way that is not the end of the sea, but something better, I hope. Don't pee in the water.
Thank you so much, Lena. Big applause, really, and thank you very much for bringing us also very closer to the sea that is very much at our backyards. I will then move on, and I would like to right now pin Mirko and Nat. And where is Nat? Let me see. I have to find you. Okay, so slowly I can, find myself on that screen. Where is that? Oh yeah. Oh God, I'm sorry. I mean, like now, trying to.
I'm waving at you.
Oh, wait a second. Oh yes, great. Because you see, I mean, like once I pinned Mirko, I mean, I kind of lost the visibility of the screen. But now you're both there, so that's excellent. Okay, the floor is yours. So I'm guessing that Nat is starting, right? Or I mean, I don't know how you're starting, but yeah.
Over to Mirko.
I'll just do a quick intro, and then I'll hand it over to Nat. This will relate also to our geographies. I will start from rivers and seas, lakes mainly in Europe, but then we will reconnect with through the ocean, and we are going to really give our attention to Pacific especially. So today I'll just share the screen. Okay. Let's see. How does this work? Okay. So here we are. So today, Nat and I will talk about anti-extractivism and post-extractivism in the context of the current green extractivist expansion, and I will briefly introduce the relationship, rather than no relationship, or the anti-social relationship of mining industry historically and today with waters, and then we will talk specifically about the looming threat of deep sea mining. So now I'll switch to slides. Just a second. Yeah, I have very many windows open, so we'll do like this. Sorry. Screen. Okay. Can you see some? Yeah. So when we talk about extractivism, it's often related to mining, but this is a very good definition, I would say, from the Gaia Foundation. Extractivism is an economic and developmental model fueled by the unsustainable exploitation of nature, from metals, minerals, and fossil fuels to land, water, and humans. A model enabled by the ideological assumption that the earth and other less powerful people are resources to be exploited for the benefit of certain humans without limit or consequence. So I think that this becomes particularly poignant when we look at what mining industry does to waters. So mines have not only historically are today also extracting water directly, especially mining water, we could say. For example, in the case of mining lithium in Chile and Argentina, they're also using water for the processing huge amounts of water, but also that's one side of it. The other side of it is that they also have actually dump heavy metals into water, and so by creating these tailing dams, and tailing dam failures have been the cause of massive loss of human, animal, and plant life and contamination all across the world. These are some of the disasters that we have seen only over the last 25 years, and only in Europe. This is to say, not only to acknowledge that mining comes from Europe, and it's definitely most intimately connected with the expansion of colonialism and imperialism, and it is grounded, this extractivist model is grounded in racism and heteropatriarchy and sexism and all these isms, but also, as it is today in Europe, it is constantly destroying habitats and people's lives and animal plant lives across Europe as well. So this brings us to the fact that mines not only leak to these massive disasters, but they also leak drop by drop or liters by liter, ton by ton daily. So it's estimated only in the US daily there is up to 70 plus million liters of water coming out from 400,000 hard rock mining sites. So it is a constant threat. Each metal rock mine, in a way, could be understood effectively as in the terms of, let's say, nuclear fallout in some ways, because now we have data showing, especially in Europe, because it's been mined for so long, that mines leak for decades, centuries, and thousands of years. Another aspect of mining is the actual disposal of mining waste directly into the sea, and this largely obsolete practice is still allowed in Norway, and there are two very big mining projects being planned. This one is Førdefjord, and I would like to give a shout out here to Natura Ungdoms organizing against this project, and another one and I like this quote here from the CEO of the mining company, who does not really trust marine biology. And the other project is plans to dispose of copper tailing waste in the Norwegian Sápmi, traditional Sami territories, and Radomska district in Repafjorden, and this case struggle is still going on. So sending love, and if you can support these struggles, look up Natura Ungdom's activity. That's the Nature and Youth organization in Norway. And so the context of all this today is that actually mining industry, and specifically metal mining industry, is selling itself as the leader, believe it or not, in getting us mining our way out of climate crisis, which means that now that the fossil fuels are largely under the pressure of civil society, and the science are slowly losing their social license to operate. Metal mining comes with revenge and is proposing itself as the solution, because metals are part of almost all so-called renewable energy technologies, such as solar, particularly wind, electric vehicles, and so forth. So here we see a paper which shows the overlappings between projects for renewable energy materials, mines with biodiversity areas. And correspondingly to this, this is just the map of some struggles against fossil fuel and metal mining conflicts, ecological distribution conflicts around the world. And mind that what we see here are conflicts that are on land mostly, and consider and relate to mining on land. Now I'd like us to move here, and I will pass the word to Nat, because one of the last frontiers of metal mining is now appearing in the shape of deep sea mining. Nat, if you want to take over, I'll stop sharing.
Sure. Thank you, Mirko. And thanks for having me here tonight. I've been really inspired by the presentations so far, and I'm really grateful to share with you research insights and the activism against what could become the biggest extractive development in the history of this world, and that's deep sea mining. And as you see, that Mirko ended there in the beautiful Pacific Ocean, which is a huge part of our planet, and that's what they're looking to exploit. But before I start, I want to bring you to this side of the world, which right now is 12:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. And I would just like to acknowledge that I am now currently in Warang, which is known as Sydney. The colonial name is Sydney. And these are the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I acknowledge that wherever I live and walk in so-called Australia, I live and walk on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander lands. Always was, always will be. And before I move to this topic of deep sea mining, to give you a little bit more context of myself, I think it's really important to state that I'm not a Pacific Islander myself. I am a colonial settler. I am of Scottish and Irish ancestry, but we were very much first settlers. And I was born in Tamaki, which is known as Auckland, which has several traditional iwis or tribes on the lands of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a Pākehā, I'm a white woman, yet my family and extended family crosses the Pacific from New Zealand to Samoa, Tonga to Papua New Guinea. My work formerly as an artist for many years, and now I would say more predominantly as an activist, has been centered in anti-colonialism, self-determination, feminism, and the social environmental crises we are facing. So when this mining, this form of extractivism, you know, and I've been working around mining for this form, you know, mining as a form of extractivism for over 2 decades. So when that intersected with my own personal connection to salt water and the ocean, and this image is a place called Piha, where I grew up on the west coast of the North Island, not that far from Tamaki, Auckland. I felt I had no choice but to understand more, connect with those on the front lines, and build networks of solidarity to stop these deep sea miners. And so actually this west coast here, there was a massive push to try and mine the iron sands here right along this west coast. And for over a decade, there was this mass mobilization of community that have managed to stop it in New Zealand. They haven't quite got a ban, but we've worked very closely with them. Although what I'm going to be talking to you about is in the very deep seas. So for the past 3 to 4 decades, there's been a growing interest in vast quantities of, you know, metals in our deep seas, and it's very metal rich. The interest is now far greater due to the rising demand for minerals and metals to produce these high-tech applications such as our smartphones and laptops, and for so-called green technologies, as Mirko talked about, this green extractivism for what they're saying climate action, you know, so we can have wind turbines, solar panels, and electric storage batteries. So currently there's no operating deep sea mine in the world. However, there is an intense and growing interest in mining for mineral exploration and exploitation, both in national and international waters throughout the Pacific. So right now there's over 1.5 million square kilometres of the Pacific Ocean under exploration leasehold. And honestly, right now, we have about 18 months to 2 years to stop this from actually opening up. And once one mine opens up, they'll all start to open up. So we see this as a very global campaign, and that we're all really interconnected to oceans, even if we're not, living near the ocean. So the deep sea I'm talking about is usually defined as the realm below 200 meters, and it's a world of extremes. The deepest part of the Pacific Ocean is the Marietta Trench, and that's about 11,000 meters deep. And temperatures near the seabed in many places hover around 0 degrees Celsius. There is next to no light, and there's really great pressures, but life really thrives. And the deep sea contains a vast array of ecosystems and marine life that we have barely begun to study. Some deep sea marine scientists say we probably only know about 1%, and there's millions of species for us to understand and discover. But the speculative deep sea miners are focusing on 3 environmental types that they want to exploit for what they are calling potential harvesting for the green transition. And potential harvesting is in quotation marks. So the first one is on the abyssal plains. So they're sort of around 4,000 to 6,000 meters deep. And they contain metallic nodules, which form over millions of years as minerals precipitate around fish teeth or bones and other small objects. And they're like the size of a lump of coal, and they're very rich in nickel, cobalt, manganese, copper, and zinc, and other minerals that are desired for this green transition and the green economy. And these regions are some of the most remote ecosystems on the planet, but they're still home to like worms, crustaceans, sponges, sea cucumbers, starfish, sea urchins, and various deep sea fish. The next type that they're looking at exploiting is the seamounts. So the seamounts come up from those abyssal plains, as you imagine, they're like these big sort of mountains. And their metal-rich crust that covers these seamounts are packed with high-value metals like cobalt and platinum. And the seamounts environment is dominated by corals and sponges, as well as tuna, sharks, dolphins, and sea turtles. So abundance of life in this part of the ocean as well. The third form of mineral deposit, is the massive sulfides or hydrothermal vents. And some of you may know, they're sort of the volcanoes down in the ocean, and they're sort of depths of about 1,500 meters to 2,000 meters. And they're very rich in copper, lead, zinc, gold, and silver. And these ores form around vents of these superheated water that occur along these volcanic ridges, which they call the Ring of Fire. So they run through a few different ocean basins around the world, and obviously the Pacific is a significant one for that. So in the mid-20th century, it was imagined that humans would soon colonize the oceans. And in a famous 1967 UN address that kicked off treaty negotiations, Ambassador Pardu of Malta projected that dolphins as sheepdogs would be herding fish as early as the 1980s. So this is the sort of mentality that we're unfortunately dealing with. And most of the world's oceans are located outside of national jurisdictions. And in these areas, deep sea mining is subject to the jurisdiction of the International Seabed Authority, which we call the ISA. So it's a small independent mining agency headquartered in Jamaica, and they exercise administrative control over 50% of the planet's ocean floor. And I can tell you right now, there is a great amount of corporate capture of this small organization. It does wield a lot of power. And you can see in this map the 3 different types that I talked to. And where it says the Clarion-Clipperton zone, that's the area that we're very concerned will be opened up within the next 2 years. And if you start to look at the size of that to land masses, you can see how huge it is. So the ISA membership comprises of 167 countries, as well as the EU, and the ISA has granted 31 exploration permits to a limited group of countries that sponsor private companies covering areas of Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. But the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific is the one of real major concern. And this is the polymetallic nodules, so in the abyssal plains. It should play. Yes, there we go. So the one thing the science is telling us is the impacts of mining the deep sea would be extensive, severe, and last for generations. It's going to cause essentially irreversible species loss and ecosystem degradation. and risks deserving the world's largest carbon sink. So it's a form of strip mining. It will leave much devastation, and it will include these type of plumes that you'll see now. And this sediment won't just sit in the deep sea. It's going to move through all the columns in the ocean and be affecting all the species right up to our food chains. This new industry has been developing without any proper scrutiny or any social license. So I will come to that a little bit more, but Pacific communities are standing very strong, and they are saying no. And right across the Pacific, they're calling for a ban on this industry. The deep sea miners, they kind of talk about the deep sea as this far off distance place, to support their right to exploit ocean seabeds. And that hides the real risks posed by this industry if it opens up. They turn a blind eye to human life and the interwoven relationship to oceans and the environment, which Pacific peoples really, and I can't talk to, but when I sit with my Pacific partners, you feel it when they talk about their connection to ocean. So, these deep sea miners describe the ocean as distant, dark, deep, and desolate. There's no life. You see their industry promotional videos, and there's no sea creatures in there at all. But they also portray it as adventurous and a frontier and go where no one's gone before, and a fantasy of mining a void without impact. Oops, sorry. But yeah, as I just mentioned, frontline Indigenous peoples and local communities and activists, artists and academics all over the world have worked to expose human rights abuses and environmental damage of mining and extractive practices. And in parts of the Pacific, you have some of the worst environmental and human rights disasters with terrestrial mining. And here in so-called Australia, we are one of the largest mining states in the world. So we know all about this type of extractivism of mining. And the peoples of the Pacific, Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia, and their sea of islands, their Pacific ways of being for thousands of years, their traditional knowledge systems, their interconnectedness across the vast Pacific, are faced with a new type of exploitation, this deep sea mining, as they sit at the precipice of the climate crisis. They are frontline to that as well. So I have here just a couple of, if you want to get your phone out and you want to take a small action, here's 2 actions that are really simple to do. The top one is definitely in solidarity with Pacific communities who are calling for a ban. And so these deep sea mining hazards, unpredictable damage to marine environments. It's difficult to reach that science, it's so difficult to reach that science has barely begun to study them. And that is our big concern. And faced with the potential impacts of commercial deep sea mining, scientists can only affirm the certainty of harm and their current inability to predict, contain, or repair it. So Western scientists know that, but Pacific people also know that because they also have their own science and their own knowledge systems to understand the health of the ocean. So deep sea mining will be profoundly connected to human, environmental, and economic systems with severe and long-lasting impacts for future generations. So refusing the deep sea miners' narrative of disconnection that they paint is an active practice of solidarity in protecting our oceans, our marine life, ecosystems, and also standing in solidarity with Indigenous communities across the Pacific. And I'd just like to finish with a quote from Pacific scholar Epeli Hauofa from his work, Our Sea of Islands. Oceania connotes a sea of islands with their inhabitants. The world of our ancestors was a large sea full of places to explore, to make their homes in it. Sorry, I can't see because this bar is in the way. Homes in it, to breed generations of seafarers like themselves. People raised in this environment were at home with the sea. They played in it as soon as they could walk steadily. They worked in it, they fought in it. They developed great skills for navigating their waters and the spirit to traverse even the few large gaps that separated the island groups. We are the sea, we are the ocean. That the past is ahead in front of us is a conception of time that helps us retain our memories and to be aware of its presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Big applause really to both of you. And perhaps then we can actually have 10, maximum 15 minutes for little questions and answers. And I'm just wondering if I can actually pin here all the speakers, or maybe I would just unpin everyone, and then we can maybe see all the room. I'm sorry, I'm kind of fighting here with my fabulous, with my fabulous Zoom layout. Okay, fantastic, and I mean, extremely rich. Any questions? Like, use your this possibility of actually asking questions. So please, either you can type them in the chat, or you can just let us know. Either raise your electronic hand or type your name so that we know that you have a question. I mean, there's quite a bunch of people in the room, so please show, so to speak. Is there anyone who'd like to start? I think there's been so much food for thought. Julia.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you, everyone. It was super inspiring, all of the different talks and different angles. Yeah, I already kind of put my vote up against deep sea mining. And Lena, I wanted to ask you something, because I was a bit sad to hear kind of about the non-viability of these mussel farms and everything. And I wanted to ask maybe two questions in relation. I guess maybe for those of you who are not at the Baltic Sea, the Baltic is actually quite difficult to, in a way, grow anything in. I think that's also what Lena was saying with a small mussel size. But has there been any attempts at integrative aquaculture, or at kind of, in a way, getting funding through the benefits of eutrophication? I'm asking because I know in Finland there are some initiatives like Origin by Ocean, for example, where they are putting this carbon sequestration first and then getting the biomass as an outcome. I just wanted to hear your opinion and whether there have been any kind of stories.
Yeah, the farm I showed, almost a lot last picture in Kiel, they're doing that. And it works. I mean, the mussels, they grow really well. The Baltic is so filled with nutrients. Everything grows really well. So the biomass is there. The species are they are struggling, but things that should not grows very well. And so there is a potential for life that is, but to farm things, it's expensive, and even these large salmon farms in Norway and in Scotland, it was too expensive in the beginning. There has to be quite a large value of the product, or really a large supply of money going into it. And I think that probably, I'm not sure there are any figures, but I would bet that it's cheaper to save the ocean or the Baltic Sea in another way than just pumping into the money needed to make these farms running. I think it has to be huge. You can't do it small scale to be commercially viable.
Thank you so much. Other questions or reflections, thoughts? Metallurgy Studio team.
Hey there, nice to see everyone. Thanks for those wonderful presentations. Great to see. Mark's just popped out, but he's here in sort of spirit. Yeah, I actually had a question for Fiona Hillary, if I pronounced your name right. And I'm really curious about this work, and particularly the way that you were working in the lab with scientists who were kind of culturing algae. And I just wondered if you could, well, I'm interested to just hear more about that aspect of the research, particularly in terms of, what you learned from those observations, and then how that actually feeds back into the work. I just think it would be really interesting to hear more about that. So thanks.
Thank you. That's such a great question. It's when I started looking at working with bioluminescent dinoflagellates, I was just making inquiries about laboratories that might be working with them. And as it turned out, the biotech team at RMIT, where I currently work, have cultures that they hold for the Defence Department in a research agreement. And it's to understand the blooming of cultures more clearly, I guess. But it was really fascinating to work in a scientific lab. I went to spend some time with Michael Latz at Scripps Oceanography as well in the States, in La Jolla. And we sound activated some Pyrocystis lanula with a karaoke machine. And I think in that process, I suddenly thought, what am I doing? And it really was a turning point in the work. And I started using hydrophones. I was fortunate to meet Leah Barclay, who's an amazing artist capturing sound from all around the world by listening. And it really reattuned my practices. And I started taking hydrophones to blooms and listening. And actually, I dropped a hydrophone into a flask that I had in my laundry. And of course, to get the glow, you shake the flask, and it's the expiration of oxygen that really is captured. And when I played it to one of the scientists I was working with, his comment was, "That's not very scientific." And I said, well, that's where the line is great for me, because I'm an artist and I don't, while I appreciate and I find science incredibly important to process, this is a point of creative departure. And then I started working with a sound artist who, he and I developed the sound that you heard in the film together, thinking from that initial point of listening to the having the hydrophone in the flask in my laundry. So it really, working with scientists really shifted the way I was approaching the blooms and the way I understood the blooms. And coming up against ethical things like they're invertebrates, so I don't need any kind of ethics to experiment with them. And that blew my brain away, thinking, wow, I can't glow in the ocean waves. How come I don't need ethics? It was really troubling for me to think about where we draw those ethical lines. And I think when we think about octopus, they're invertebrates and one of the most intelligent species in the ocean. So it really shifted my position and made me understand quite clearly my privilege, and that I should probably think with and through the dinoflagellates rather than try to make them, instrumentalize them for my own purposes. I don't know if that answers your question. Metallurgy Lab Studio.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, I see here, you know, there is a question on the chat. Fiona, were you also able to blow the brains of the scientists with new perspectives?
So another scientist, when I shared the sound with him, his position, he just said, I had never thought for a minute about what they might sound like. Never for a minute. It's a whole new way of thinking. So equally, and there's a moment when we were collecting some deep sea water in the lab from a massive tank, and one of the scientists I was working with, I said to him, sometimes I really wish I was a scientist. And he said, sometimes I really wish I was an artist. So it was a really beautiful moment in our work.
Absolutely, because I mean, not always it happens that, you know, that relation is actually that kind of mutual in the kind of art science collaborations. Sue, I see your hand. But unmute yourself.
Right. Wow, what a fantastic panel. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I'm here and that my eyes are still open. So that's really good. Because it's quite late here, just to explain. I've got a question, but I'm just going to lead up to it a bit, and it kind of combines what Fraud was offering us, and it also combines what Natalie and Mirko were offering us. And just before I go on, I just want to do a really big shout out to Nat and all of the work that she's been doing, all of the advocacy that she's been doing over the many years to kind of combat and find ways around building the solidarity against seabed warming. So I just wanted to start first with, Freud's comment, which was fabulous, which was framing the 3 stages of extinction as being the sort of oil, the trawling net, and the combustion engine. And I just wanted to plant in there that there's 4. And the 4th one is law. Because it's through the law that the law provides the enabling template for extinction, basically. In particular, what I'm talking about is the International Law of the Sea. And so the International Law of the Sea is one of the biggest framework conventions that we have. In terms of its jurisdiction, it's absolutely massive. And in terms of the mandates that it gives to its institutions, like the International Seabed Authority, that's quite phenomenal. The International Seabed Authority has a jurisdiction over more than half of the planet, and it's principally given a mandate to develop the seafloor. But I want to go back a bit, and I want to say that when the Law of the Sea was being developed, it emerged out of a desire, it emerged in a post-war environment out of a desire to create a model that could distribute, that could generate economic equity amongst the nations. So the original driving force for seabed mining was the new international economic order, for which the G77 countries, which were the small island nations, this is back in the 60s and 70s, the small island nations, the landlocked nations, and other smaller sort of economies were really, really keen to be lifted out of poverty, or this is the narrative anyway. And a way to do that was through seabed minerals. So seabed minerals were one of the original impetus behind the Law of the Sea. So as that convention was being developed, it got railroaded in the 80s with neoliberal agendas, in particular the Reagan era. And then that new international economic order fell to the background. So it was there was no longer a drive to develop the seabed based on economic equity amongst nations. The drive then shifted to this push to, well, maybe we can get, we can generate our social license because we can argue that, seabed minerals are necessary for the renewables, which is exactly what the speakers have been sort of talking of. But what I think that the Law of the Sea does, and what I think, I'm just such an advocate for artists, creative researchers, anyone interested in the future of the ocean, to pay close heed to the law. It's boring as batshit sometimes, but if it's really worth drilling into the conceptual kind of paradigms that it presents and the claims that it makes as a sort of representative template for engaging with more than human natures of the sea. What it actually sets up for us, though, is this quandary about extractivism versus provisioning. So being, all good materialists as we are, and recognising the nature of embodied being and ecological subjectivity, we would know that we are materially vulnerable. So my question to the panel, sorry about the lead up, my question to the panel is, given our material vulnerability, how do we parse the difference between extractivism and provisioning? So in other words, it's not, I could ask a simple question, and it might be, is there such a thing as good mining? But the question's a little bit more nuanced. The question is, we do need materials, and we may well need materials from the ocean at some point in time. We don't know. And how do we do that? And where do we draw the line between provisioning and extractivism, the excesses of that? Sorry about being long-winded.
Thank you so much, Sue. Who would like to jump on that question?
I'm happy. Thanks, Sue, by the way. I mean, obviously, I wasn't able to give as much detail and backstory of the ISA, but and of course of your expertise around sort of law. So it's great to have you in this space. I think it's a really good question you pose. I don't think we ever need to mine our deep seas. I think this, I mean, you know, I've worked in the climate movement for a long time. I was locking onto coal-fired fire-powered stations in 2005 here in Australia. So I've been involved in a long time. And the problem for me is that we can't keep consuming like we do. We can't. Why there's this mentality, for example, Deep Green, you know, so one of the metals company, one of the really aggressive deep sea mining companies that's really been the PR spin for the industry. You know, their whole vision is like, we're going to save the world and we're going to have 1 billion EV cars. It's like, do we need 1 billion EV cars? Do we need any more cars? Like, I think it's a really rethinking. And I know that it's hard. Like, I know, you know, maybe in the space we can kind of be on that page. How do we change that in more of the, you know, our local communities and the mainstream? I mean, I know here in Australia, there's absolutely no political will. So it is difficult. For me, I guess in the work I do, and probably with Mirko and Yes to Life, No to Mining, and particularly in the work I'm trying to do here in Australia and trying to talk about Australia's green extractivism, because we are going to be also a massive miner here, and we already are overseas, is to really try and bring justice in the center of everything, and for people to understand, and the movement, the climate movement, to understand the supply and value chains. So you can't just push wind turbines and solar power if the supply chains aren't clean and just and fair. And I think there's people in the movement that know that, but they sort of back themselves in a little bit of a corner, I think, in their narratives to be able to shift. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, Mirko, you might want to add more to this in terms of, I guess, what we talk about within Yes to Life, No to Mining, because while we're working with communities that don't want mining or trying to stop mining, really a lot of our agenda is like, what does a world beyond mining look like? You know, so I don't know, Mirko, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Thanks, Ed. I'll bring into the room our dear colleague from Gaia, actually, Hal, because I think Hal puts it up very poignantly. Hal Rhodes in a recent article where he says, quote, "The most pressing question isn't where new mining should happen, as European states and the European Union suggest. It is how we can immediately and dramatically reduce the need for new mines by tackling the ultimate drivers of this industry, overconsumption, inequity, and the pursuit of endless economic growth." So I think that it also wraps up from my side, and I think, yeah, really getting out of this, doing first analysis of how deeply our societies and communities are locked within this one-way system is first moment, but then the other one is really, stopping these tracks, and now and there is, 1,000 alternatives, and if one is concerned about materials and mining as a sort of destiny, there's a really good report from colleagues at Seas at Risk, which came out recently, which actually shows a blueprint for getting out, breaking free from mining by 2050. They basically analyze lots of data and make a claim that actually we could, if I understand it correctly, close down all the mines by 2050, for example. So nothing is predetermined, basically. I'll link to the report here if it's of interest.
Yeah. And I think just to add is that what's really frightening is that while, you know, I think we're all advocates that we need to end fossil fuel, the fossil fuel industry, we're going to be mining so much for this supposed green transition. It's kind of mind-blowing. Like, I've been working around mining in particular, and of course there's other forms of extractivism, and they're all interconnected, and they talk about green steel and green that, but like there's always going to be carbon emissions in all these processes, like in all these supply chains, and that's just the reality probably for the next, and the more they do, the more carbon, it just seems, it's kind of nuts, you know, when you think of it that way, but it's quite hard. I can get it. It's hard for people to get a picture. If you've never seen a mine site in your life, what do you know? Like, I mean, I've stood at the edge of mine sites. I've seen friends of my sacred sites being completely desecrated. You know, I can't feel what they're feeling, but I can definitely see that this is a disturbing thing. And so a lot of people never get to see what a mine looks like, or what a forest completely deforested looks like, and I think that's part of it in terms of, you know, being able to bring the human stories to people. And I don't think it's because people don't want to know. I think it's because we don't have access often to who's really growing our food. What, you know, those people growing the food, do they even know where it goes? You know, it's just that kind of, we're in this really globalized world, yet a lot of those stories aren't told.
Thank you so much. I will let Frode speak for a moment, and I think then, you know, you'll be the kind of last before the break, so to speak.
Okay. So much to say. I'll try to be brief, but I just want to, well, I think we get back in a moment to what Natalie and Mirko have been talking about, and I'm really happy that someone also took some time to discuss the very problematic nature of the green economy, actually. But to come back quickly to Sue's really important point about legal frameworks, which I think are key, and we didn't really have the time to explore that today in our talk, but we have been very much invested in looking into legal frameworks because they're so important. So thank you for bringing it up. And such as fishery partnership agreements or the exclusive economic zone in the oceans as well. Or, for example, ICCAT, which is supposedly an institution that's supposed to lobby for the conservation of tuna and other ocean species. But effectively, Jennifer Teleska has written a book talking about how it actually manages the extinction of tuna rather than its conservation, which it's supposed to do. So I think that legal frameworks are really key. So thank you for bringing that up. And in terms of how you know what Mirko and Natalie were talking about, how the green economy is creating in a way a smokescreen to divert from the actual question, which should be to consume less. Of course, it's a kind of a smokescreen diverting this question. But I think we would even pose it somewhere further if we think about between extractivism and provisioning. I think this is difficult now to think about because I think that there's been a collapse between, a decoupling between consumption and provisioning, because of when we think about how they're working towards the extinction of the tuna has no more relationship to our consumption of the tuna, because of course, even if we all stopped eating tuna, there would be fishing of the tuna to be put in deep freezers as the practice, as I'm sure we're all aware, towards selling it at auction when it will be extinct. So our consumption has now been decoupled completely in a way. So I'm wondering if extractivism and provisioning are already decoupled through this kind of neoliberalization of the oceans, and if we can even think in those terms.
It's also because the current going back to legal frameworks within the UNICLO, as we were saying, there is a provision of Article, I think, 26 or 36, which is it's a clause that specialist has to like use it or lose it, which means that countries are incentivized to exploit it to something which is called maximum sustainable yield. These are completely fallacy and another way of abstraction. To the point that even in the legal frameworks is instituted, you know, that how oceans have to be exploited to the point that will no longer be profitable. So like that's also the importance of create, you know, this legal, because from the beginning, even though when they were instituted as a way to protect you know, the third way, not capitalism, not communism, you know, countries that were trying to rethink otherwise, even within the foundational legal frameworks, they were they served certain purposes. So yeah, that's another point into that.
So how to think beyond consumption?
Yeah, Yeah, and I think that this is, this is something that actually is the thread that kind of connects us back to seaside arts and low-trophic imaginaries that actually very much started with thinking precisely about consumption or beyond consumption, or beyond complicity or about complicity. Anyway, I think that, having all those very rich thoughts and ideas with us, I would like us to take 10-minute break to just, add extra sugar to our brains and blood system so that we can be, prepared for the next round. And also, I would like to say that, towards the end, we'll also have a kind of, joint, like apart from the discussion about the second panel, we'll also have a joint kind of plenary. So hopefully we can make it to and, be on time. So see you 3:20 Central European time. Thank you. Okay, so we are slowly coming back and hopefully we'll soon have everyone actually in the after this extremely short break, but hopefully sufficient leg stretcher. I do hope that we'll also soon have everyone back, especially the speakers in the panel too. I think that's
Nina.
very crucial. Fantastic. So welcome back, everyone, in the room again. And basically, I will just, we are very much excited after the first panel. So, it's like just, like mid-adventure and more things to come. So I'm just passing the baton to Cecilia, who will introduce us all to the speakers in the second panel.
Hey everybody again, and as Marietta said, warm welcome back to panel 2. Now allow me the honor to introduce very briefly our exciting speakers. We have Julia Lohman, Sarah Blissett, Åse Brunborg-Lie, Nina Lycke. And after that, as we did the last time, we will have a Q&A, so you can prepare your questions or comments. And we really want, me and Marietta, this to be an open space where there are really no dumb questions, and we really try to think together. So we try to get beyond individual prestige stuff. But with that said, I would love to give some individual prestige stuff to the speakers. So first we have the panel 2 speaker under the heading of algae as an agent of change. And I would like to say a few words about, we are namely so proud to have you here, Julia. So German-born artist, designer and researcher Julia Lohman investigates and critiques the ethical and material value systems underpinning our relationship with flora and fauna. And Julia Lohman is professor of practice in contemporary design at Aalto University, Helsinki, Finland, where she also lives. In her practice and teaching, she promotes an empathetic, more than human-centric mindset and views design as a way of connecting, knowing, caring, and acting across disciplines and different levels of complexity. After that, we will encounter seaweed soup and iodine imaginaries with Sarah Blissett. And a few words about you too, Sarah, which me and all of us in the kelp curing workshop are still missing so much. So Sarah Blissett is a multidisciplinary artist and researcher. She holds a PhD in performance studies from the University of Roehampton, and her research explores how artistic practice can reimagine the role that entangled algae human agencies play in changing ecologies. And you can read more about her recent projects, for instance, how nature builds with modern art. And of course, as I mentioned, the kelp curing at the Lofoten International Art Festival and the Kelp Congress. Now, our third speaker will talk to intersected water bodies, diving into the deep sea. And someone participating in that kelp curing is Asa Brunborg-Lee, whose work actually examines how to create in the Anthropocene, with its accompanying philosophical and ethical questions, as well as for possible futures. They point out blind spots in social and built structures and propose new alternatives for coexistence to the human-centric exceptional. And Lee holds an MA in scenography from the Norwegian Theatre Academy and a BA from Trondheim Academy of Fine Arts. And you can read more at the website. Now, our last speaker is someone that is particularly dear to me and to many others here. It's Professor Emerita Nina Lycke. And Nina will talk about, under the heading of contemplating diatom human relations as entrance to an ethics of planetary companionship. Wow. And Professor Lycke is a professor emerita, as I mentioned, at Linköping University, Sweden, and an adjunct professor at Aarhus University in Denmark. She has participated in the building of feminist studies in Scandinavia and Europe more broadly since the 70s, and recently co-founded an international network for queer deaf studies. She is also a poet and a writer, and her monographs include, for instance, the amazing book People called Cosmodolphins, and Feminist Studies and Vibrant Death coming out next year. So a warm welcome to the panelists, and let's just give, yes, let's give the floor to our first speaker, Professor Julia Lohman.
Okay, 1 second, I will share my screen. Okay, great. Can you see that? Brilliant.
Absolutely.
I only have 15 minutes, and I hope maybe you guys can wave at me when when there's only 2-3 minutes, so that'd be quick. I'll give an introduction into my work. So my background is in design, as you will see, although I have to say, especially on this panel, I am really questioning whether I'm still within design, because I really feel that there are so many kindred spirits here, and I feel a lot more connected somehow than in many other design discussions. So I started this presentation maybe with this question of what I mean when I say design. I think the most appropriate term is maybe critical practice, like everything that you all are doing, and from whichever angle we're looking critically at what we are, how we're changing the world around us, how we're accommodating to the changes that are already happening. So in a way, when I talk about design, I mean this extended framing of design, where it goes far beyond the classical posters and toasters of design. So it's not about making objects or making signs and symbols anymore. Design has expanded beyond that into, creating, like understanding and creating the services and interactions between people and things and people and organisms, and then understanding our impact on this planet on a much longer trajectory involving system thinking and transition design, really kind of recognizing that what we are making makes us back. So whatever we're putting into this world has long-term implications on who we are in this world and what this world looks like. But design has also expanded dramatically into the microsphere, which means that we are not just creating with the materials we're given, we are figuring out our materialities, our value systems, our ethics, and in a way, even it goes down to molecule chains and DNA with bioengineering and CRISPR and all of these things. Design exists on all of these levels, but with that comes, of course, the recognition that it is an integrative practice, that the knowledge that we need to understand our impact resides beyond the world of design, and we need to use it as a bridge builder, as a method to build bridges between disciplinary practices and different ways of knowing and acting and caring. So when I was an artist or designer in residence in Japan in 2007, I had worked previously with animal materials, and I was working with the overfishing of the oceans and especially tuna fishing. And I was interested in kind of whether in Japan there is consideration of reimagining their national dishes in different ways. But I was mostly fascinated by a visit to the fish market when I encountered this wonderful organism, which is the Japanese kombu. And as I pondered about this leather-like material, I was just in awe, and I thought that there must be a craft around it. I was just thinking, wow, this is like leather. We could make anything from it. And I thought there might be a Japanese craft that I'm just not aware of because I'm from a different cultural context. And when I found out that there wasn't, I thought, okay, maybe then it's kind of the future that I just saw, and maybe I have to bring it about. So then the next question that came up was, what does it actually mean to take seaweed out of the ocean to then make something from it? And I started looking into this kind of ecological impact and what it means. And I was more and more fascinated in a way by the pulling power of the seaweed, by the potential of the seaweed to actually almost serve as an alter ego to us, or kind of, taking out what we put in too much, this kind of possibility for seaweed to be a rebalancing agent of our own deeds. However, for it to do that, it does it in very natural, healthy ocean, really normally. But now we have this quite degraded ocean in many areas where the local seaweed kelp forests have a problem with warming oceans, with acidification and all of these topics. So I was thinking, well, okay, how can we now develop it as a resource or use it as a resource, find this new materiality, but at the same time not make the same mistakes that we made on land? How can it be the blueprint for doing things differently? So here you can see seaweed at the sea farm in Sweden. It's also one of these blue economy projects where they are really looking at the environmental impact, positive or negative, of seaweed farming. And it's quite astonishing to kind of speak with the people who are involved in the seaweed farming, because there is the possibility for the seaweed to pull out these excess nutrients in the water and really kind of clear up some of the imbalances that we created. But at the same time, we would then need to find uses that are of high enough value to then make it worthwhile to farm the seaweed. At the same time, we can actually grow it on these ropes without kind of extra fertilizer, without antibiotics, without, and like a lot of these problems with other ocean farms. But if we don't eat it only, if we use it as a material, maybe we can even do more. Maybe we can start growing it in the areas where the ocean needs cleaning the most, rather than where the ocean is cleanest. And if we don't want to eat it, maybe we can kind of find other places where it can be this, filtration method, basically. So now I want to talk a little bit about this experience of working with this material that I kind of deeply fell in love with. So it started with me thinking, okay, great. So here's a material where actually it might be a good replacement material for some of the ones that really give us such problems, like leather and plastics and so forth. But at the same time, we could actually use it as a blueprint for how to engage differently. So more and more, the seaweed became like morphed from just being my material to almost being a partner, to then being a muse and like an inspiration for how we can try to be more like seaweed. So this is why I put this slide in. Biomaterials are more than just materials. They become our familiar spirits and influence all aspects of the creative process. So I had to really chuckle when we had this dinoflagellate kind of connections, because I think we all feel very, very close to the organisms we work with, and we want to do them justice. So in a way, doing justice to the seaweed is to acknowledge you know, that it's in precarious situations in some natural forests. We can't just kind of start dredging up and using more and more material there, but that there is also potential for growing it in areas where, for example, we have a sandy sea bottom and not much shelter for the fish, and to kind of integrate the growing with some of the needs of the other organisms. Because brown kelp, at least the type of seaweed that I'm working with, is quite often an ecosystem builder. Quite often it's one of the keystone species in an area. And it has this amazing kind of mentality almost to actually grow fast and thick and strong, but not at the expense of the others, but helping the other organisms around it. So I've more and more come to see these organisms as our familiar spirits. So familiar spirits in kind of mythology are these non-human animals, quite often the witch's cat or the black crow, that help doing the magic and that help giving an idea and, you know, yeah, helping make the potions. And I think in science, when we're looking at biomaterialities and when we're working with ecological concepts, we can use these familiar spirits of us to actually understand the situations we're engaging with. So in my case, the seaweed becomes a relational object through which I can make linkages with people from all other disciplines, whether it is law or microbiology or ecology, because it becomes my relational object. And at the same time, a material, and especially a biomaterial, pulls our thinking in two directions. It pulls our thinking back into the ocean, because it is not quite a material, it's not quite kind of, it still has this agency of the ocean in it. But it also pulls our thinking forwards into multiple possible futures. So it helps us get together as communities of practice to think together what makes sense to make from this organism and why and how and in which location we should make what type of object. Tim Ingold says, sentient practitioners and active materials continually answer to or correspond with one another in the generation of form. And this is what I try to do when I work with seaweed. I try to make objects that have seaweedness at their core, that are quite, quite abstract in function, so that people can actually use them to think of objects we might make from seaweed without being curtailed by them already being a chair or a floor or a cup or whatever, but that are quite literal in material properties. So we can actually understand a lot about seaweedness when we are experiencing the form, because the form was generated by being attentive to that seaweedness in the material. And you can't help but actually developing empathy for these natural materials we're working with, because they have such a strong agency, because they're so reactive to kind of the environmental factors, to the humidity in the air. They sometimes, you leave them in the evening and in the morning that you come back and they have developed this white crust of mannitol because of the humidity levels changing overnight. And it's quite amazing how they become an other that we relate to and that help us perhaps sometimes consider a non-human position within our processes. So seaweedness itself also engages us through all senses. So when we have this practice and we share the process of working with seaweed, people who come in, they immediately smell it, they can taste it, they can touch it. And through that very bodily experience, they are more than just this intellectual human being that is so different to other life forms. They are there with their whole body as just one of many species that co-inhabit this world. And the stories they share immediately are childhood memories, having their legs entangled in the beach, having wonderful Asian meals. And somehow this kind of, the presence of the material makes the humans that interact with it a lot more present than a very like hypothetical intellectual concept. So this was in the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I ran the Department of Seaweed for half a year as part of my doctoral thesis at the Royal College of Art, between the Royal College of Art and the V&A. And this was a space people would come in They'd be like, oh, I didn't know there was a department of seaweed at the V&A. And then we would be like, yeah, you're standing right in it, welcome. So we would start using this space to discuss together possibilities of futures with seaweed, but not only kind of the positivistic ones, but also the ones that we didn't want to achieve. So in a way, the seaweed helped us form this community of practice, the Department of Seaweed, and it became a lot richer than my own speculation of a possible future, because we were together thinking of all these different possible applications of seaweed, all of the negative impacts of us now exploiting another resource, all of the positive ones that we should try and figure out, because we shared a horizon, a value horizon that kind of made us not only think of possible and probable futures, but also of preferable ones. So this is, by the way, this co-speculative design is the design method I developed throughout this PhD. So now I'm just leaving you with some of the images of what the exploration with seaweed brings. On the left side is me harvesting in Sweden. Then there is a biocolor research project I'm currently involved in, and this is dyed with woad, seaweed dyed with a natural biocolor from Finland. Laser cut and engraved seaweed, and then the right one is dyed with onion peel. So depending on how it's treated, it can look like leather or like stained glass. It can be kind of stretched. And here is a piece we made in the V&A. This is the Okinaga note. So it's a collective piece that is almost a tribute, a portrait of seaweedness, of the possibility of that material. And here you can see the same piece, like a couple of years later. The green is chlorophyll green in the seaweed, and it is degraded by light. So you have this beautiful bleaching that is kind of happening, but that is actually, not as horrible as the coral bleaching. It's maybe more poetic. So in 2020, I was invited to the World Economic Forum, and I built this pavilion for people to be in the main conference hall and to be sheltered by this man-made environment for a moment and be able to enjoy a more kind of nature-looking or natural environment. And at the same place, at the same time, we also ran a workshop on the other side of that corridor where people could work with the seaweed themselves and make their own seaweed brooches. And it was incredibly powerful what kind of conversations emerged from this interaction of hands-on work. And in a way, it allowed people to really start the conversation from a very oblique angle. And we would talk about ocean health, we would talk about ocean literacy, but also completely different things to do with craft or with other things. But it was quite amazing how a shared process can actually build a community. So out of this, I developed a framework that actually resonates a lot with a lot of the head, heart, and hand frameworks you might know from transformational change and transformational learning practices or eco-literacy. But this is kind of how I engage when I go into a situation where I really try to enable people to make a change in their community. Is kind of understanding the creative practice to be the flux between knowing, acting, and caring, and seeing what knowing is already present, who is already acting, how people care, and then acknowledging which of the three is the weakest link and kind of trying to build them in sync. Because I think only if the three aspects are built together, our change-making activities will make sense and will be fruitful in the long run. So I think that was my last slide. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Julia. This was fantastic. And what pieces to think with and co-speculate with, and this concept of seaweedness. Oi, that will stick. It's my great pleasure to introduce now on the stage Sarah Blissett.
Hi
Where
there.
are you, Sarah? Oh, there you are.
So I just want to start by thanking Marietta and Cecilia very much for having me here. Just to start with thinking through this notion of the end of the sea more. Also to say that I forgot my headphones. So if there is some background noise, apologies, and please just let me know if it interferes.
The sound is perfect right now, so no worries.
Thank you. I also have a bowl of water. I don't have any slides, but I'm going to be thinking and working with the material of the seaweed. And it really does feed into this idea that Julia has just been talking about, this idea of relational being. And yeah, that's very much what I'm thinking with as well. So my research develops the notion of cooking with algae as a methodology for exploring how relations between humans and algae shape ecologies across different scales. And my approach is influenced by the notion of sympoiesis, developed by Donna Haraway, which weaves together material and metaphorical practices of cooking and digesting to reflect on the stories that algae tell of the world and its entanglements. In this talk, I'll be sharing a series of encounters and stories from my research in a process of thinking and cooking with seaweed and its elemental constituent iodine, as we enter into new modes of digestion with the end of the sea. So in March 2017, I came to Studland in Dorset, an area of coast in the south of England, to spend time with a group of foragers and to learn more about foraging for edible varieties of seaweed, which later became part of my soup making. And these were some of my first experiences of paying particular attention to seaweeds and the multi-species communities that they are embedded in. So we spent some time scrambling across rock pools and pruning pieces off sea spaghetti and dulse. And another crucial actant in these forays were a type of shellfish called razor clams. Alongside looking out for seaweeds, our group were told to watch out for keyhole-shaped indentations in the sand that signaled a razor clam was buried beneath the surface. So as I walked along the beach, my eyes glued to these small areas of sand in front of my toes, I was looking out for these shapes. And I thought I saw one, and I knelt down, and there was the group leaders came round and they began to pour sea salt into these grooves. So I don't know if this is going to work with the camera. Okay, so they began to pour sea salt over the sand where these indentations were. And as we knelt there, looking at this area of sand no bigger than a coin, it began to cave in on itself. And then suddenly just out popped this tip of a razor clam from beneath the surface. And it was pulled upwards, and then I began sort of turning this over in my hands. Okay, so I'm going to stop with the salt. Okay, so I began turning the razor clam over in my hands and just really kind of wondering at this discovery, picturing lots of these shellfish buried beneath the surface in this kind of wrack zone by the tide. And this encounter came back to me when I was writing this talk, because I was thinking about this idea of how the touching tides kind of remark these areas of where the sea ends kind of constantly. And these beings that are immersed in these kind of sort of liminal zones between these two worlds of sea and sand got me also kind of thinking more about Stacey Alamo's notion of transcorporeality, which has also become really important in my work. And I quote, transcorporeality, it gives a sense of the human as substantially and perpetually interconnected with the flows of substances and the agencies of environments. Now, these interconnected flows are revealed in relation to razor clams as occurring through particular matters of salt and sand. So the embodied memory of salt and sand on my skin, and really feeling it now, it connects to my thinking about this element of iodine that I'm then going to go on to talk about in connection with seaweed. So the human body needs iodine for the functioning of the thyroid gland. And iodine was first discovered by the French chemist Bernard Courtois in 1811 when it was extracted from seaweed. So iodine is transdermal and it's absorbed through the skin. And the human body also absorbs iodine through the mouth and the lungs. A 2-decade-long study published in the Irish Medical Journal in 2016 found that continued exposure to seaweed-rich air is able to supplement an individual's iodine intake. And Professor Smith, who ran the study, states that The benefits are associated not just with being near the sea, but by being able to take a good lungful of air near a seaweed-rich beach. So iodine is an element that comes in different forms, and stories of transcorporeal connections with seaweed really highlight the impacts of these forms in terms of my thinking about the notion of the end of the sea and the effects through different processes of bodily digestion. So I'm going to add this to my bowl of water. I don't know if you can see this here. Okay. Following the earthquake and tsunami that damaged the Fukushima nuclear plant in 2011, large amounts of radiation were released into the atmosphere in the Pacific Ocean. In 2012, iodine 131 radiation was recorded in the canopy blades of the kelp Macrocystis pyrifera, sampled from the California coast, in levels far greater than before the release. And this is a study by Manley and Lowe, 2012. Now, kelps are keystone species, and they help measure the exposure of the coastal environment to the effects of radiation. So the far-reaching impacts of these radiation disasters materialize through the seaweeds, as these algae bodies are particularly susceptible to the flows of radiation in ways that can then have devastating effects on the wider ecosystem through the food web. So thinking with iodine, there are further nuances to these connections because of the role this element plays in pathways of radiation exposure and its transcorporeal connection to seaweeds and kelp in particular. So I have a piece here of sugar kelp. So varieties of kelp have especially high amounts of naturally occurring iodine. And following the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the Polish government distributed kelp pills as an early experiment in remediating the effects of radiation exposure, the effects of which were lower rates of thyroid cancer than previously predicted. So now kelp pills help reduce the human body's exposure to radiation poisoning, because after digesting one form of naturally occurring iodine, the body will not absorb another form of iodine in such high amounts from the environment. And this discovery has helped develop into a WHO procedure for future prevention in the event of nuclear disaster. So thinking with seaweed and iodine in this context reveals elemental entanglements between algae and humans that highlight connections between what might be thought of as dichotomies between ocean health and harm through a range of mostly anthropocentric discourse and material ecological relations. So seaweeds absorbs changes in environmental conditions into their bodies in ways that remark the effects of these changes on different bodies and environments. And thinking along these lines of absorbing atmospheric changes, which also links back to what Julia was just talking about, absorbing these kind of atmospheric changes into their bodies takes me to my next story about seaweed and weather. I'm adding this one to my bowl as well here. Okay, this might be better. Okay, so in Old English weather lore, spelt L-O-R-E, bladder wrack seaweed was used to predict if it was going to rain. By hanging a piece of bladder wrack seaweed outside your house and feeling the seaweed daily, you could literally feel what the weather was going to do. So if the seaweed was dry, then the weather would stay dry. And if it was damp and flexible, then it was going to rain. Now, if there is enough moisture in the air, the dried seaweed will rehydrate, and moisture in the air is an indicator of rain. So it's possible for these changes in the atmosphere to literally be felt through the seaweed bodies. I did actually hang this piece of seaweed outside my window last night, but it's kind of dried out a little bit since then. It's kind of a bit damp today, but it's not actually raining. But yeah, I'm going to add this to my bowl as well, and some more bladder wrack. In August 2012, it rained seaweed, actual seaweed, in a small street in Berkeley, Gloucestershire, UK. According to a newspaper report in the Telegraph, One resident explained how they had picked up an entire bucket of green slime from their garden. A weather scientist from the Met Office explained that the seaweed could have been swept up as a result of a cloud funnel, a small water spout that touched down on the beach in a storm and carried the seaweed skyward. So it traveled from Clevedon Beach to a residential street 20 miles away, where it was then deposited across a range of lawns and residences. This is not a unique weather event, although it's more common for it to be fish, actually raining fish, than seaweed. But for now, I'm going to just return to the seaweed and to this sense of trying to link through these stories between elemental and atmospheric flows. And the iodine cycle in particular is of particular importance for the atmosphere through its impacts on the climate by reducing the forces of harmful ozone on the atmosphere. So marine algae is also crucial to the iodine cycle. And again, thinking through these seaweeds can help reveal the impacts of climate change on ocean ecologies in ways that are entangled with the life cycles of algae and their elements. And this brings me to my last story. So in early March 2018, masses of porphyra seaweed, more commonly known as larvae, shut down a nuclear reactor plant in EDF's energy plant in Edinburgh. A Guardian article dated the 5th of March 2018, titled "In a Larva," describes how seaweed shut down the nuclear reactor in bad weather again, explaining that it actually wasn't the first time that Torness had been affected by, quote, seaborne nuisances. The previous cause at the same plant in Edinburgh had been a swarm of roving jellyfish in 2011. Journalist Adam Vaughan writes, quote, "Roving jellyfish and seaweed have long been unwanted guests at Scotland's last 2 nuclear power stations. Now the marine algae have hit again, forcing one of the plants to partially power down, despite freezing temperatures pushing up demand for electricity. During last week's cold weather, excessive amounts of seaweed entered the cooling system of the Torness plant, causing one reactor to be closed on Thursday. Its owner, EDF Energy, said the measure had been taken due to, quote, the risk of marine ingress." So in this story, the marine algae, alongside their cold weather accomplice, serve as these anthropomorphized villains in this kind of story, performing a marine ingress and disrupting Scotland's energy supply. And in terms of this kind of sympoetic linkage, this again reveals the delicate interplay between connecting currents of nuclear energy, ocean, and changing weather. So these currents of seaweed and iodine highlight issues around particularly anthropocentric discourse in regard to thinking about energy production and material entanglements with and through iodine. And just to conclude then, so thinking with iodine as part of a range of embodied encounters and connections to seaweed relates to flows of digesting elements through both the food web and the atmosphere. So bringing together these encounters with algae becomes, in the case of this talk, a kind of seaweed soup. And it begins a new process of storied digestion around the potential sea ends, or ends of the sea and the porous zones between the surfaces of the sea and sand, and transdermal connections between organs and watery bodies. And as I imagine what these various matterings mean for considering an end or ends of the sea, pollutants and nuclear waste are bound up with algae bodies in unique ways, as well as their potential remediating effects and sustenance. So to think more with these seaweeds through iodine in particular focuses on the porous exchanges between human bodies and algae in ways that open up pathways for imagining new narratives of elemental entanglement in Earth's changing ecologies. And that's where I'll finish. That's my soup for today. Yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Oh, I would like to taste that soup. Or I'm not sure actually, but thank you so much for these elemental seaweed stories and the further ideas you always give us for kelp curing. Thank you, Sarah. And it's actually time now to pass the scene to Ase Brunborg-Lie.
Hello.
Welcome. Hey.
Hey, thank you. I will hopefully try to make it through without any extreme coughing. I have all my remedies, but yeah, if it happens, then I will just mute myself if you're wondering what's going on. Thank you so much, Marietta and Cecilia, for inviting me, and for all the bless you, all the really inspiring and beautiful and urgent presentations so far. Yeah, it's really interesting to listen to. Yeah, I should just get going. Okay. I will try and share my screen. Let's see if I manage. It's always a bit interesting. Oh, no, wait. Can I do it? Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I can.
Yes, you can.
Of course you can. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not really tech savvy, although I work a lot with technology for some strange reason. Where does he view full screen? Here we go. Do you see full screen? No? There?
Yes, though,
yeah.
You know, we see the Zoom kind of like, you know, the Zoom gray squares.
Oh, shit. Wait, if I do like that, and then here?
Yes. Better. Yeah, I think that we can handle this.
If I move this.
Yeah, that will help, I think.
This is it.
Exactly.
I don't know why it does that. That's very strange. Okay, moving on. So I will talk about an artwork that I exhibited at the Metamorph Biennale in 2020 called Intersected Bodies. And it was part of the Biennale of Art and Technology titled Digital Wild. And its focus that year was into aspects of digital ecology as potential utopian spaces. But I wanted to investigate the more physical implications of digital worlds. And it took its reference point, the city of Trondheim, where the exhibition was placed, with its long history of digging deep into the landscape, in past especially for copper. But now the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, in collaboration with other actors, such as the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, are exploring potential extractions below the seabed to allegedly create an ethical and sustainable technological future. But as we've heard already, I don't really believe a ethical and sustainable future can arise from excavating this new and unfamiliar unique ecology that we are just discovering in the place we know the least about on Earth. In my process, I had conversations with all research platforms that are part of the deep sea mining platform of the University in Trondheim. And that includes chemists, ethics department, robotics, marine engineer, marine biologist, and more. And my most extensive collaboration was with marine biologist Hans Tore Rapp, who during a research trip for the University of Bergen, discovered Loki's castle in 2008, a set of 5 active hydrothermal vents in the mid-Atlantic ridge in the Norwegian Sea, the one you can see on this image. And these vents that are basically underwater volcanoes spew up a mix of many different rare earths that can be used for computers, smartphones, electrical batteries, etc., and contain, among other things, copper, zinc, silver, gold, lead, as also already mentioned by Natalie. Yeah, and these vents are now being explored as possible mining area. And RAP generously lent me video material taken from these vents with remotely operated robots. It's the arms that you can see here that they use to both film but also take specimens. And they also engaged in longer conversations about the deep sea ecology that they found out there. And he himself specializes in sea sponges. And I just want to, take a very big thank you to him. And he's unfortunately passed away last year. So in this unique and diverse ecology, thriving in the dark parts of it in extreme temperatures reaching up to 400 degrees Celsius, they found what they believe is possibly one of the cradles of life on Earth. Among other, in Loki's castle, they found Loki archaeota, or type of archaea, that they believe can be a sort of missing link to the evolution in complex life. Yes, and we know extremely little about these places. Yeah, but we are anyway starting to want to drill them. And the work that I made in relation to this research was that I had made a video piece, a large video piece that played out in the exhibition space with the material filled down at Loki's castle. And the video circles around a story of a robot living down at the sea bottom with these vents. And this research that they're doing with the robots is that they want them to stay down at the sea bottom for forever, basically, and that they would charge and do everything down there. So they would basically just spend their whole entire lifespan down at the sea bottom. So it's kind of thinking about what a robot with artificial intelligence would sort of think about being down at, or if it would think down at these vents in this ecology that has been placed with. And then there's sort of speculations throughout that there's time passing and perhaps is still doing this sort of research or drilling operations, but there's nobody really answering on from the land anymore. In the exhibition space was also a very deep bass sound work with recordings taken from hydrothermal vents. And these are very physical sounds. And some of the bass are like below hearing for human beings, but it's very overpowering sounds, I would say. And then the video was a large scale. So then, yeah, I was trying to work a bit with scale and also with physicality. So it was very cold in the exhibition space. And then you would sort of have a sense of, yeah, this is some of the machinery that they might possibly use down at these vents that are kind of like so terrifying, I would say. Yeah, and then together with the video piece and the sound work in the exhibition space, I also had sort of hydrothermal vent / underwater helmet that you could lower over your head using an electric pulley system that is kind of similar to how they lowered robots into the sea. And this helmet is made from a kind of algae and cornstarch resin. And inside there was saltwater ecology and also some deep sea entities. That was lent to me from researchers at NTNU. And inside there you could listen in on a very intimately spoken text that was telling about someone diving into the deep to find this before now unknown ecology, and how that magical meeting is with these beings before someone chooses to tear these bodies apart to make extensions of their own bodies. And it reflects on the kind of godlike character this extractionist entity has, of taking life into its own hands, deciding who lives and who dies, now holding perhaps the cradle of all life in its hands, while at the same time possibly setting in motion something we don't know the repercussions of. And in this helmet, they were sitting on this granite rock that I kind of imagine as a sort of throne on the bottom of the sea. And this Loki's castle is is named after Norrøn gods. And there's also these vents kind of look like nebulas, which are also, where are they? Nebulas. So they look very much like nebulas to me, which are also these cradles of life in the universe where new stars are born. And there's something like very alien and like life that we are discovering here on the bottom of the sea. And there's something very violent and intimate at the same time about ripping these bodies apart and putting them onto ourselves. And this last line in the helmet spins around how we hold the origin of life in our hands, now that we might be at the very end of everything. And I think it's interesting how we excavate minerals that are also part of our own bodies, and sort of destroying genetic codes that could tell us about our own origin. And this industry is in a way digging away at their own core. And I wanted to play some excerpts of the video piece for you, and also a kind of online iteration of the helmet piece with a 360 video done inside of it. That was part of an online iteration of this work last year. If I manage to share with you. Let's see. Am I running very over time? I have no concept.
You're fine. You're fine. We are kind of outside. We reconfigured the time.
Time is relative.
No worries.
Let me see here. So I will show you an excerpt, a tiny excerpt from the film first, if I manage. And then I'll mute myself. Let me know if it doesn't work.
We cannot see the, no, now we can, sorry.
Hello.
Hey.
We'll also share, do I have time to share a short snippet more from the helmet?
So to speak. Okay. I don't know where Cecilia is.
Hey. I'm sure you can make it short. I'm really excited to see what it looks like inside that helmet.
Yeah, it's a 360 movie, so it doesn't really work on the screen, but you can sort of get a gist of it because you will get like the whole panned. But yeah. Let me see. Sorry. Oh wait, maybe I can. Yeah. Sorry, do you have sound?
No, I think that we don't.
Sorry. 2 seconds. Okay, I'll be super quick. Okay, maybe this one. Yeah. Okay. And maybe now.
Yes.
Diving deep into the absolute dark. It is cold here, wet. Nothing to see for miles and miles. Deserted and seemingly dead. But suddenly, there you are. Ancient beings. The first ones here. And perhaps even older. Arriving from the great beyond. Now rising from the deep. At your core, heat and metals pulsing out furiously. White and red worms swaying softly around your openings, slurping red soils. A myriad of strange life forms here in the deepest dark.
Wow. Thank you so much.
A quick version.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's also now my great pleasure to not just thank you, Asse, but also to welcome Nina Lykke.
Okay, thank you. And I'll also have to share my screen. So we hope it works. It worked before. Can you see it? No?
Now it's the browser.
Okay, so I'll just try the other one. Still the browser?
Still the browser.
What about this?
No, Nina, the browser.
It's very strange because I have it on my screen.
And we tried it and it works. As usual.
Tried both. Otherwise, you must do it, Marietta.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, do you want to try once more? I mean, otherwise, or should I already?
No.
Now we have it.
You have it? Okay, great. And I can even, yeah.
Yes, that's perfect right now.
Okay, good. So, contemplating diatom-human relations as entrance to an ethics of planetary kinship and companionship. And what I'm very interested in is ethics. And I'm very interested also in how we humans unfold new sensibilities, because I think it's really, really needed that we really work to unfold new sensibilities to overcome all this extraction that we have heard about. The paper will focus on diatoms, microalgae living in oceans and estuaries all over the world. I frame my discussions of diatoms and planetary ethics through Donna Haraway's concept of companion species and post-human scholar Astrid Schrader's question what it entails to begin to care about critters that appear as alien and distant to humans in a geohistorical and evolutionary biology sense. So, what is a diatom? Diatoms are single-celled aquatic microalgae characterized as eukaryotes, that is, organisms with a cell nucleus protected by a membrane. They trace their ancestry back to the Jurassic 150 million years ago. Living diatoms fill the waters of the planet today. I think that they compete with the dinoflagellates that we heard about. But they're unique among microalgae insofar as their protected encasement is a multicolored and often patterned pair of silica shells called the frustrule. Diatoms belong to the group of phytoplankton, which, like terrestrial plants, contain chlorophyll and live mainly by photosynthesis. Living diatoms are reported to generate about 20 to 50% of the planet's oxygen annually and to contribute considerably to the storage in the oceans of carbon from the atmosphere. We also heard that earlier. According to a recent report from NASA, diatom populations are today showing tendencies to dwindle, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's not known why, but of course, it's assumed that it's an effect of climate change, surprise, surprise. This is, of course, worrying seen in a human utilitarian perspective. However, as I shall argue, to begin to care in an ethical sense about diatoms in the sense of a planetary ethics of companionship, of course, requires a much, much, much deeper and different kind of commitment. So my love of diatoms, I'll say a bit about that. I have an intimate love relationship to diatoms. It has emerged from my unfolding of spiritual material connections to the place where my lesbian longtime partner's ashes are scattered, the seabed waters and cliffs of the Fur Formation in Limfjorden in the northern part of Denmark. The waters there abound with living diatoms, and the seabed and cliffs are made up of sediments of fossilized of diatoms fossilized 55 million years ago. In the Ice Age, 10,000 years ago, the sediments were pushed up by the ice to form 60 meters high cliffs. Raising out of the flatland surrounding the fjord, these cliffs manifest the enormous diatomaceous activity which happened in the transition from Paleocene to Eocene of the planet's geohistory. And I feel a deep spiritual material connection and resonance with the diatom abounding waters and with the diatomaceous seabed and cliffs. And my own ashes are also going to be spread there. So it's also the place I will immerse myself in when I die. So queer ecologies and companionship with diatoms, how to begin to care. Bringing my spiritual material feelings of connectedness with the diatoms into conversation with queer ecologies and pressing need, as I see it, for a planetary ethics that help counteracting the current Anthropocene necropolitics. I've started to contemplate the possibilities of an ethics of planetary companionship. I ask if it's possible to materialize a bio and geo-egalitarian ethics where all planetary beings, including diatoms and other critters that are evolutionary distant from humans, are re-ontologized as companions rather than a priori instrumentalized objects of human curiosity and or utilitarian needs. And I have been listening very carefully the whole afternoon because I think that's what we all of us in some ways are talking about. For me, the question has two inspirations. Firstly, it's inspired by posthuman scholar Astrid Schrader, who in a discussion of leaf bugs deformed by low long-term doses of radiation in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster raised the question, how can we even begin to care for critters so apparently far away from us as leaf bugs? Schrader was prompted to pose this question when in a classroom setting, she confronted the students with two texts on the effects of the Chernobyl catastrophe. One text addressed the human sufferings in the aftermath of the catastrophe. The other one dealt with the artwork of Swiss visual artist Cornelia Hesse-Honecker, who with her paintings of deformed leaf bugs articulated an activist protest, encouraging viewers to begin to care about these critters. To Schrader's surprise, a majority of the students became appalled by her juxtaposition of the two texts. Confronted with the human misery caused by the Chernobyl disaster, most of the students wondered in disbelief how could one even start to care about deformed leaf bugs? With the immensely accelerated species extinctions happen in the 21st century, the awareness of the need to care also about the very alien species is, of course, becoming more widespread. Still, I think that Schrader's example from 2015 shows that such an understanding is far from generally acknowledged. In the hierarchy of those whom we, modern humans, care about and those we don't care about, strange, minute beings such as leaf bugs or diatoms or a lot of the other beings we've been talking about today seem still to lurk unnoticed around in the bottomless abyss of this hierarchy. And I feel compelled for my own sake, for my own part, to admit that I would probably not have begun to care about diatoms myself in the way I do it now, had I not encountered them under the very special circumstances related to the scattering of my beloved's ashes and my deep desire to develop material spiritual practices of mourning. So Schrader's question, how to begin to care, is, I think, highly pertinent. My question, what it means and requires to enter into an ethical relation of companionship to diatoms, is also inspired by Donna Haraway and her use of the concept of companion species, referring to mutually enriching human-animal relations. And I note the broad and all-encompassing dimensions of the concept of companion species when Haraway emphasizes that it's, I quote, less a category than a pointer to an ongoing becoming with, to a shared process of mutual becoming across species and other orders. As mentioned, I came to ask the question of companionship and becoming with diatoms through my mourning practices. This also entailed the unfolding of a post-human phenomenology of mourning. And the key aspect of my theorizing here is a conversation with post-human philosopher Ralph Akampora's noun symphysis and his rethinking of the notion of sympathy from a corpo-affective perspective. In line with the philosophy of Spinoza, Acampora stresses the concept's reference to affecting and becoming corporeally affected by and to get to co-experience the ways in which our significant others are bodily affected. Taking Akampora's conceptual framework further, I have suggested a translation of the noun symphysis into its verb form, sympathizing, stressing that the bonding of companions builds upon ongoing transcorporeal affective processes rather than static relationships. I also argue that I had extended my sympathizing and loving companionship with my partner to the assemblages with which her bodily remains have become entangled and to the place where her ashes are scattered. This is part of my book, Vibrant Death, and I cannot go more into it here. I'll briefly illustrate, though, what the establishing of a sympathizing companionship with diatoms, among others, it's only a small brief glimpse, entails for me, with the overcoming of the temporal dizziness as example, which caught me when I tried to sympathize with the diatoms through the lens of geohistory and the history of evolution biology. I could, of course, logically understand the figures on the timeline of the planet's deep time histories, but if I tried to sympathize with the diatoms against this background, I was thrown in a kind of deep time vertigo. Time became a bottomless abyss. However, to overcome the vertigo, I invoked immanence philosophy and Gilles Deleuze's distinction between time as chronos, chronological time, and time as aion, the multidirectional time of the instant. According to Deleuze, time as chronos is conceptualized as a one-directional movement, a sequence of thick and substantial presents following each other along the forward-moving arrow of time that is moving towards future presents while leaving the past ones further and further behind. In contrast, time as aion is the time of the always ephemeral instant which as a thin line separates past and future, but escapes being pinned down to something essential and substantial. The ionic time of the instant works multidirectionally, intensely connected to rhizomatic networks of other past and future instants, which in their ultimate ephemerality are impossible to submit to any kind of measure of predetermined directionality. Together with a post-human phenomenology, which investigates that which is shared across borders of human and more than human, a shift of perspective to ionic time allows me to transgress the onto epistemological schemes of Kronos, which keep me and the diatoms and a lot of other creatures apart. Firstly, iron overall undoes the ways in which Kronos decisively lets a vast chronology of geological epochs separate my Anthropocene presence from the far beyond Eocene past of the fossilized diatoms. Secondly, iron makes it possible to bridge the specific evolution biology history gap between the so-called simple single-cell diatom and complex, so-called complex trillions cell me. For within the realm of iron, both I and my diatom companions are moving in a rhizomatic network of becomings which momentarily can bring us bodily close to each other. Going with a rhizomatic network of ionic instants can, for example, facilitate my synthesizing with diatoms becoming victims of violent premature death due to deadly environmental conditions, anoxic events where oxygen depletion and acidification together make seawaters toxic. Such events killed diatoms en masse when the Four Formation once was formed 55 million years ago, but they happen today as well, now mainly as a result of human-induced global warming and discharge of phosphates and nitrogen from fertilizers used much too intensively and carelessly in human agriculture. Within a network of ionic instants, I can bodily synthesize with diatom death due to anoxic events, because such events are dangerous for my body as well. And thirdly, when establishing my synthesizing efforts in the cosmic time zones of iron, beyond the chronologies of geohistory and evolution biology, I can also start to attune to and learn from the wisdom which diatoms carry in their bodies, an enormously bodily fund of accumulated generational ancestral experience from instants, tons of instants, not only of violent death, but also of connative ability to persevere in vibrantly repeated cycles of entangled living and dying, is materialized in diatom bodies. They have an intergenerational experience of attuning to planetary conditions, which by far surpasses that which has been accumulated by my species. So they're far more wise. I will not, due to time, come with a concluding, or my concluding remarks will be this slide, which you can read. And then I will read the last stanza from one of my poems on algae, which is part of my book, Vibrant Death. So from last stanza from the poem Algae Chant. Algae time, ionic time, no beginning and no end, just unending co-becomings and the multiplicity of instants in a cosmic spiral dance. Time's arrow moving from simplicity to complexity. Who said evolution? Just forget it. Let the algae, complex and resilient, teach you to unlearn your modern human hubris. Ancestral algae wisdom. In the beginning, there were algae, and so there were before and after your beginning. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nina. Thank you. And I would like to thank all the panelists for making a wonderful panel together, basically. And it's actually time now to have a little bit of Q&A. So if you have some questions or comments or co-thinking that you would like to do in the chat or just speak out, please.
So wave your electronic hand because we might not follow the the material one on the screen, so to speak. Or I mean or type. But I mean we have this amazing couple of minutes to actually use with wonderful speakers. So I mean that kind of opportunity might not come very fast. In the near future. So use your chance wisely. Anyone would like to jump in? Audrey.
Hello, I feel somewhat unprepared for this question, but I just wanted to throw it out because I feel like there's a common thread of death throughout the presentations. I also felt like I needed a moment after Nina's last words to process. So, and I have not had that moment, but I speak nonetheless. So obviously in Nina's case, we're talking about mourning, but that creates this link to these diatoms, but then thinking about how the diatoms themselves have resilience, but also cycles of death within them, and this wisdom of the diatoms becomes a really beautiful space to think through. But then earlier Åsa was talking about how there's digging towards maybe probably our own death, but also towards the beginning of life coming through the vents, of course. And so I was wondering if thinking about maybe death is how this is useful to think through this climate emergency, catastrophe, whatever word we want to call it. So I'm just throwing this out there in this not very formulated way.
Nina, would you like to?
I really, I mean, I am also myself thinking a lot through death, and my book is called Vibrant Death because it is a book on mourning. But I really think that I suggest to think, and that's also part of my book, to think, I mean, to make a distinction between extractivist death and what I call vibrant death, because I think that is, for example, the cycles of diatoms. I mean, they have been cycling, they live for 6 days, and they have been doing these 6 days life cycles, I mean, since the Jurassic. So, and on the other hand, what's happening now is the extractivist death, which does not, which is not a cyclic death, because there's no renewal possible after extractivist death. So I think what the extinction that humans, modern humans, are somehow spreading all over is a death which cannot, where there's no renewal. So therefore I think it's so important to make this kind of this, because I think it's yeah, well, I think it's important to think with death, but not to think death as something which necessarily is a bad and gloomy thing. I think transhumanist ideas about immortality is just prolonging the whole techno-fix way of thinking. So in that sense, I think I mean, I very much agree with you that thinking through death and different kinds of death is as I see it, very, very important.
Thank you so much, dear Nina. Asa, would you like to also kind of, relate to that comment question? Or
I mean, I think you're like the experts in vibrant death. But yeah, it is. I mean, in my in this project, it is. Yeah, there is something kind of profound with a meeting of these vents, I think, and in this vent ecology, and sort of digging into the origin of our history and sort of at the end of history, and yeah, maybe a way to sort of, I don't know, for me it's sort of a way to like digest everything. Yeah, but there are definitely more yeah, hopefully beautiful ways still that we can sort of keep on going, although I mean, like with vibrant death, as Marietta and Nina have been working with, where you have this like death and recuperation, and that's sort of the hope, to be able to facilitate that. When you have these vents, they also die off, and the whole vent ecology dies with it. But then they sprout up in different sites, and they're quite actually quite good at dying off and creating new diverse sites. So that's and of course there are extremophiles, and it's places where nobody thought anyone could live. So that's kind of yeah, gives me hope.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or points that you would like to bring forward? I mean, anyone in the room, really. Also, with regard to the first panel or connecting the two. Nina, is that a hand that tries to?
I mean, I would really like to hear other people's somehow relation to thinking. I mean, thinking with death is for sure important, but I think thinking with the body. My way of theorizing, call this synthesizing. But I think that everyone who's been talking today has somehow put on the agenda these that it takes new sensibilities and new kinds of, unfolding new bodily ways of engaging. So I would like to hear how everybody else think about this embodied way of approaching the sea, these critters.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of came through both panels, but I think particularly in that second panel, first started with Fiona really thinking from the kind of, place, being in the place, but also, so very much the kind of body materiality situated, but also, a lot of like transcorporeality going on. And I was particularly touched, by iodine soup with Sarah, really, performing and precisely kind of diving into that body materiality and the kind of porosity of the bodies. But yeah, anyone would like to jump on that topic? And Julia.
Yeah, I think it's actually connected. I think this, Nina, what you were saying, this circular or vibrant death, rather than breaking the circle, when we are really destroying something and making the regeneration impossible, I think that is super interesting. And I think that links actually to this whole idea of understanding ourselves as an ecosystem and as part of the ecosystem, or keeping ourselves apart from it. And I think it's almost a similar thing going on there. So in my view, that we are very, very different to all other organisms through our intellect, because we can look into the space, we can look into the microspheres, we can look into the past and future so much. So we are really a very strange, very different animal. in that respect, but through our bodies, we're totally connected. So in a way, then when we feel this connection, we also feel part of the ecosystems. And I think that's where the responsibility comes. So in a way, for example, going to sauna is really a nature experience, but it's an experience of the nature within us rather than, rather than in the forest, which is rather the nature outside us somehow. But I think it's this resonating together that makes us care and that makes us be part of it. And that then actually allows this thinking about death to be, you just become aware of this cyclicality and that you take part in the circle. And to me, whenever I hear people speaking about forever life, I'm like, oh my God, this is so crazy. How disconnected are you to even want that somehow? I mean, it's kind of very strange to not want to be part of that cyclical notion somehow.
Thank you so much. Anyone else who would like to kind of relate back to that kind of porous materialities and body materialities and sensibilities, perhaps, because I think that the element of sensibilities was so pronounced, and actually literally every of the papers, even the ones who were not, which were not necessarily literally speaking about sensibilities, but actually sensibilities were very much present there. Any of the speakers or anyone in the room? Or everyone is so tired, and I actually also admire people who, who we are forcing now to sit like very deep in the middle of the night or in the morning. Fiona?
Marietta, from 10 to 3 in the morning in Melbourne, I'm thinking with what everybody's saying around life and death and this kind of beginning and ending. There is no ending. The cycles of life continue, and I think the dissolve that I was thinking with fits beautifully. I think the event feels bookended in some ways, or ongoing maybe, with the idea of the dissolve of us in our own ocean, in the ocean, through to Nina's beautiful capture of the dissolve of the love of her life and mourning. It's quite a beautiful bookend. I'm not going to make any sense.
Thank you so much.
You just did.
Yeah. And also I think that, it was really beautiful that you brought, Fiona, at the very beginning, Deborah Bird Rose and the shimmering on very different levels, but also that kind of, I think with Rose, what comes is this question of ethical time as well, and her own kind of thinking of death and the cycles of life, which I think that are very much here present exactly through, especially here in the discussion after that second panel. Mirko.
If there is some time left. Yeah, about ethical time, I felt now inspired to move on, right? No, I just felt today it was really like, reminds me of Irigaray's injunction of the whole, Western philosophies, like forgetting to go there, and how, like, in a way, so much of our works here in different ways is about unforgetting of, water, of ocean, but how also this is really kind of also pushing our, also life, death, but also really this, so many multiple dimensions, between plants, animal, fungal, in a way that, when you think about, only now we're developing some in the humanity, speaking some sort of, stuttering language around deep time, say. However, with the ocean and sea and river, I would say, and lakes, we get all these, like, so many times that are just existing and passing through each other to some extent, but, things are so slower, and they're really, like, even though we belong to them partially, because of course we are connected as bodies of water and so forth, however, they are really, really, so different from all the terrestrial, all our knowledge is that kind of how we think about, the lives and deaths. And just felt awed about this today, coming across somehow diffracted through all that was said. Yeah, it became more tangible. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Mirko. And I'm passing the baton to Audrey.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that in terms of thinking about embodied practice that has really transpired today, that I think it's quite inspiring to see that so many of us are, in a way, as a kind of pushback towards this tragedy of the Enlightenment, which has, you know, separated subject and object and us from our environment, and that it was inspiring today to see how so many practices are invested in rekindling that those entanglements and thinking not in that separation, but about those connections, which is really the only way in which it can become viable to think about the extraction being directly connected to us. And so it was, I just wanted to say that it was really inspiring to listen to all of these practices that are working towards this, and it's all really also very important work, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you all, really. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, it's been quite a lot for the second part of this event. Are there any other kind of things that you'd like to either speakers or people who managed to join us today share in the room? Any kind of, you know, questions, but also reflections or things you feel that could or should be put on the table before, you know, we kind of move in different directions. Rosalie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hi. First of all, thanks everyone. It was very inspirational, especially for me that's just started my master thesis on multi-species justice. It's really, really cool and bringing me lots of ideas and topics to work on. So thanks for that. And then I have a question that might be a bit off topic on what we just discussed, but just going to throw it in there and see what the responses are. But I was actually thinking, I think this question is more for Fiona or Asse, that as I understood it, have been trying to create or create experiences or exhibitions that create more intimacy with nature and reactivate those imaginaries to create intimacy with nature. But I was wondering how it is for them, or if they thought about it, how it is to use digital tools to do that, that at first sight might seem a bit contradictory to the reconnection you want to do with nature. So I was wondering about that, and if you could have some thoughts on that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Really happy to jump in if that's okay, Asa, and maybe you'll follow. One of the biggest, in an elaboration of this presentation, I do talk about that that kind of contradictory element of the use of digital technologies, and that this is something we need to address. And I think we saw that discussed deeply in the deep sea mining conversations today. It is a concern going forward. For me, I was really interested. I've gone from making very analog immersive environments with neon and sound, and I did an installation at the Western Treatment Plant in an old bluestone water tower with, it was 2 7-hour durational performances of electric guitarists. And it was a neon, and it was actually that work that connected me into, with the response of the birds outside responding to the electric guitars, being louder and trying to engage with them. It started making me think about what other things reverberate in the environment in this kind of communicative manner, communing. So for me, this shift to digital technologies was really significant. But one of the really interesting things about it, even in its contradiction, which is, I think, work going forward for all of us working in technology, but is that the capacity to completely disembody the viewer. And while that can sometimes, again, be criticised as a kind of God trick, it's really quite fascinating because I can locate anyone from anywhere on the shore of the Western Treatment Plant with using VR goggles. So it's really transformative, and nothing else I could get to other than probably transcendental meditation, and not everybody engages with those levels of meditation. So I think VR technology, as difficult as the issues of extractive mining are, is something that's quite transformative. So that was my decision to push forward and use that kind of space. Asa, do you have something you'd add?
Yeah, I also, of course, it's kind of strange to work with technologies as you're kind of criticizing those the materials that are used to create that specific technology. And for my projects, like some of the things that I've tried to do is so reuse, like for instance, the sensor tech that was inside the helmet, reuse old material, like sort of secondhand tech, and also, of course, lots like video material and all of this is also a part of our ecology. So I don't see it as, I wouldn't see it as something that is necessarily alienating me from said ecology in a way. It's just another part of it, or materials that are combined into something new. And it also creates, as Fiona said, this kind of experiences that can create a kind of connection that would otherwise be maybe completely impossible. I mean, I can't send you down to the deep sea, but I could possibly transport you there in an exhibition space and maybe bring you very close to something of an experience that makes you connect more to that entity there. But it's both. I don't see it as necessarily, as sort of this. It doesn't possibly. There doesn't have to be a disconnect there, but there also should be like an ethical use of that tech, of course, and be aware of the implementations of it and where it's the materials are coming from and etc. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think that despite the fact that there might still be questions and points for discussion, I think that we are now kind of running over time. And I think that if we keep you a little bit longer, you won't forgive us.
They will, Marietta, they will.
They probably will. Nonetheless, I think that this is probably the right time to try to, and close this wonderful, inspiring time. We've had a pure tour de force with, just a tiny break and so much inspiration. So I would like to, Cecilia and myself would like to thank you all. First of all, the speakers, for your generosity, for your time, for your kindness, for sharing your amazing ideas and reflections with us. Big thanks to everyone who participated in the discussion, who participated in this event, who shared the space and shared your thoughts with us.
Shared tips in the chat.
Exactly. I mean, both vocally and or orally and in the written form, and just have been present with us. So, as you know, the recording of this event will be available later on YouTube. Later, that is not very precise. Later, I mean, we are very kind of low on staff, so and we are very much living according to the ethos of DIY. So. One day you will see it on our YouTube channel. But I mean, for now, we would like to thank you so much for this beautiful, sharing all of the time and discussions. And we'll, of course, follow up on this, because I mean, we keep on working with Oceanic Humanities, and we keep on working with each of you in very different ways, in different spaces and projects. So they kind of intertwine and interweave with one another. So, sooner or later, we'll see each other and we continue the discussion. So thank you so much. Stay in touch. So please follow the Posthumanities Hub website for the upcoming events. And
the Eco and Bioart Lab as well, of course.
As well, yes, and our social media, through which I think that the updates might reach you as very, very, very quickly and promptly. So yes, I think that will be it for now. And we also wish you a lovely holiday break, or the end of the year break. Happy 2022, may it be better than the past 2 years for everyone, and healthy 2022, and to be continued. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Take care, and we stay in touch.
We stay in touch. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, take good care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
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 Goodbye.